Sit down, girl. Interns don't speak in my courtroom unless spoken to. Judge Harold Whitmore's voice cracked through courtroom 4B like a whip. Maya Williams, a young black legal intern, stood frozen beside the defense table, clutching her folder so tightly her fingers trembled. She knew everyone in that courtroom expected her to sit down and stay silent, but her father's life was being destroyed in front of her eyes. "Your Honor, please, my father is innocent," she said, her voice shaking but clear. The prosecution's timeline contradicts the witness statements. The evidence does not support the accusation. Whitmore slammed his gavel onto the bench with enough force to make several jurors flinch. "I did not ask for your opinion." Still, Maya kept speaking. Desperation overriding fear. "Sir, the witness statement was altered after filing. The forensic timeline was changed overnight. My father could not have committed this crime. You are a legal intern," Whitmore snapped, leaning forward with open contempt. "A child with a name badge and a clipboard. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." Laughter spread through the gallery. Maya's cheeks burned, but she refused to move. "With respect, Your Honor." "With respect?" Whitmore barked. "You think because someone let you carry a few files into this building that you belong among officers of the court?" More laughter followed. At the defense table, Robert Williams shut his eyes. Whitmore pointed toward Maya as if she were dirt on the floor. "Your father is charged with murder because evidence places him at the scene, because witnesses saw him commit the act, and because, unlike you, the adults in this room understand how criminal procedure works." "That evidence is false," Maya shouted. Whitmore rose halfway from the bench. "Enough. Sit down." Now, before Maya could obey, the prosecutor called the next witness. "The state calls Mr. Leonard Pike." Pike walked to the witness stand. Maya sank into her chair only because her knees nearly gave out beneath her. The prosecutor approached. "Mr. Pike, where were you on the night of March 14th? "Outside Delaney's Liquor on West Jackson. Around 10:30. Maya's grip tightened around her pen. "And did you observe the defendant, Robert Williams, at that location?" "Yes, sir. I saw him arguing with the victim in the alley." Then Pike said the sentence that shattered the last of Maya's restraint. "I saw Robert Williams stab that man with my own eyes." "No." Maya shot to her feet so fast her chair crashed backward onto the floor. "He's lying. That's not what he told police." "You changed his statement." "Baby, no," Robert shouted, panic flooding his face. "Maya, sit down. Please, baby, don't. They're framing him," she cried, tears rising in her voice. "That witness changed his testimony. The reports were altered. My father didn't kill anybody." Whitmore's face darkened with rage. "Bailiff." Two court officers moved instantly. "Remove her from my courtroom." Maya stumbled backward, shaking her head frantically. "No, please. Listen to me. Just check the timestamps, please." Robert surged to his feet despite the shackles on his wrists. "Your Honor, please. She's my daughter. She's upset. Don't do this to her. Sit him down," Whitmore roared. Deputies forced Robert back into his chair. Maya twisted as the bailiff seized her arm. "No, please. He's innocent. My father didn't kill anyone." Whitmore stared down from the bench with the cold expression of a man passing sentence. "You wish to behave like a criminal in my courtroom," he said. "Then you may be treated like one." He pointed toward her. "Cuff her." Robert went pale. "No," he shouted. "Don't you touch my daughter." Maya recoiled in horror. "Please. No, I'm sorry. Your Honor, please don't do this." The first cuff snapped around her wrist. She jerked instinctively, panicked, trying to pull free. "Stop resisting," the bailiff barked. "I'm not resisting, please. You're hurting me." "Hold still," another officer shouted as he twisted her arm harder behind her back. Maya cried out in pain. Her heel slipped on the polished courtroom floor, and before she could catch herself, the bailiff shoved her with such force that she lost her footing completely and crashed onto the marble floor. A sickening crack echoed through the room. Pain exploded behind her eyes. Warm blood immediately spilled down the side of her face. Someone in the gallery gasped. "Oh my God." Robert let out a raw, broken scream. Maya, dazed and bleeding. Maya lay with her cheek pressed against the cold marble. while the bailiff forced her arms tighter behind her back. "Maybe next time," he growled into her ear. "You'll learn to keep your damn mouth shut in court." The cuffs dug painfully into her wrists. Whitmore watched from above without the slightest trace of concern. "Perhaps now," he said calmly, "Miss Williams will understand that emotion is not a substitute for evidence." Robert's eyes filled with tears. "Please," he whispered helplessly. "Please don't hurt her." Blood dripped from Maya's brow onto the courtroom floor. The humiliation hollowed her out from the inside. She lay there in handcuffs before the entire courtroom, bleeding, shaking, powerless, while strangers stared at her exactly the way Whitmore wanted them to, like she was a hysterical girl who did not belong. After several long seconds, Whitmore waved dismissively. "Remove the restraints and seat her. If she speaks again, she spends the night in lockup." The officers uncuffed her roughly and dragged her back to her chair. Her wrists throbbed. Blood stained the collar of her blouse. The testimony resumed as though nothing had happened, as though the destruction of her dignity were simply another procedural matter, as though her father's life were not being buried beneath lies one sentence at a time. By lunch recess, everyone in the courtroom already looked at Robert like a guilty man. Jurors filed out. Maya sat motionless until Robert was led toward her in chains. "Baby," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Come here." She rushed to him, blood still drying at her temple. His shackled hands rose as far as they could and touched her shoulder. "You listen to me," he said, tears in his eyes. "Don't you ever do that again. They're lying about you." She choked out. "They're going to take you away for something you didn't do." "I know." Then he leaned closer. "Somebody built this case before they ever arrested me." Maya froze. "What?" "Too much lined up too clean," Robert whispered. "Witnesses from nowhere. Reports changing overnight. Detectives acting like they knew the ending before they asked the first question. That ain't investigation. That's a setup." The deputy tugged his chain. "Time." Robert squeezed her shoulder. "Find the truth," he whispered. Then he was gone. Those words followed Maya all the way back to the public defender's office. She dropped the case binder onto her desk and tore it open. She reread every witness statement. Charles Benton, the public defender assigned to her father's case, came back carrying 2 cartons of cold Chinese takeout and stopped short when he saw the dried blood near Maya's hairline. "My God, what did they do to you?" She barely looked up. The amended forensic report was uploaded at 11:42 last night. He frowned. "What?" "The coroner signed it at 8:10. And," she spun the laptop toward him, "the metadata says the file was modified after signature." His expression changed instantly. She laid down another page. "Original blood spatter analysis estimates the killer was over 6 feet tall. Robert Williams was 5'8". She laid down another. "Pike's first statement says parking lot at 9:50. Today he testified alley at 10:30. They shifted the timeline to fit my father's schedule." Benton slowly lowered himself into the chair. "Jesus." Maya stared him in the eye. "They're altering evidence." He looked toward the caseboard pinned to the wall. "If you're right," he said carefully, "then whoever's doing this has power." Maya thought of Whitmore's face as he watched her bleed on the floor. She slowly closed the binder. "No," she whispered. Benton frowned. "What?" She looked toward the courthouse across the street, the building where men like Whitmore hid behind robes and authority. "They don't just have power." Her voice hardened. "They have control." Thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline. Rain streaked the glass. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out her late mother's leather notebook. Written inside the cover in faded handwriting were the words her mother had left her years before. "Truth survives longer than lies." Maya touched the page and thought of the confidence on Whitmore's face, the look of a man who believed himself untouchable. Benton watched her carefully. "Where are you going?" She stood, gathering the files into her arms. "To prove my father didn't kill anyone." And 12 floors above them, in chambers lined with polished oak and framed legal honors, Judge Harold Whitmore sat comfortably beneath the seal of Illinois, certain the young black intern he had humiliated, handcuffed, and bloodied in open court had finally learned her place. He had no idea she was about to destroy everything he had built. By the time Maya Williams left the public defender's office that night, The rain over downtown Chicago had thinned into a cold mist. Her temple still throbbed where it had struck the marble floor, and the bruise near her hairline had already darkened beneath the skin. She knew it would be impossible to hide by morning. Instead of going straight home, she stopped at a 24-hour drugstore on Clark Street and bought antiseptic, gauze, and the cheapest concealer she could find. The cashier, a woman in her late 50s with silver roots showing beneath dyed brown hair, looked at the bruise and frowned. "You should have gone to urgent care." "I'm fine," Maya said quietly. The woman gave her a doubtful look. That usually means the opposite. Maya forced a small smile, paid, and stepped back into the damp Chicago night. When she got home, the apartment felt too quiet. Her father's work boots were still by the door, and his lunch cooler still sat on the kitchen counter where the detectives had left it after tearing through the place. Maya stood there for a long moment, staring at it. For as long as she could remember, Robert Williams had packed the same simple lunch every weekday: a turkey sandwich, an apple, and black coffee in a dented thermos. It was the lunch of a working man, an honest man, not a murderer. She sat at the kitchen table, opened the case file again, and worked until 2 in the morning. Legal pads covered the table in neat sections for witness statements, evidence logs, and inconsistencies. The more Maya compared the documents, the less the case looked like a real investigation, and the more it looked like something carefully assembled to force one clean conclusion. Every inconvenient detail had been smoothed away. Every rough edge had disappeared. According to the state's timeline, Robert had been in the alley behind Delaney's Liquor at 10:31 p.m. The revised witness statement supported that time. The amended forensic report supported it too. Even the edited security footage, grainy and incomplete in exactly the right places, seemed built to support the same story. Maya circled the timestamp again and pulled out her father's work records from the folder Charles Benton had given her. Robert had badged out of the courthouse janitorial basement at 10:12 p.m. Even if he walked fast, caught every lucky break, and moved faster than a man his age should, he still would have needed about 20 minutes to get to West Jackson. She leaned back and stared at the page. The timeline was not impossible, but it was far too tight for a murder case being presented as unquestionable truth. The state wanted the jury to believe her father had left work, reached the alley, found the victim, argued, killed him, and fled in 19 minutes. That was not a solid case. That was a story being forced into shape. At 7 the next morning, courtroom 4B smelled faintly of old paper, wet wool, and burnt vending machine coffee. Jurors filed in with tired faces. Regular spectators settled onto the wooden benches, ready for another day of public ruin. A local reporter adjusted her camera crew near the back. Maya entered with Charles Benton, carrying 3 binders and wearing a fresh bandage hidden beneath makeup that did very little to cover the swelling. Judge Harold Whitmore noticed the bruise immediately. His eyes rested on it for half a second before moving on. He offered no apology, no acknowledgement, and no sign of discomfort. He simply looked at it with the cool satisfaction of a man seeing yesterday's lesson still written on her face. Robert was brought in from holding and seated at the defense table. The moment he saw Maya's forehead, something in his expression tightened. He looked as if he wanted to say much more than he could, but all he asked was, "You all right?" She nodded once. "I'm working." He held her gaze for a moment. Pride and pain mixed in his eyes. "That's my girl." The court came to order. Before the prosecution could continue, Benton rose from the defense table. "Your Honor, the defense moves for a brief continuance based on newly discovered discrepancies in the evidentiary record, including altered witness timelines and metadata concerns involving the amended forensic submission." Whitmore did not even pretend to consider it. Denied. Benton remained standing. "Your Honor, the defense has a good faith basis to believe the state's file was modified after signature, and, counsel," Whitmore said smoothly, "this court will not indulge theatrical delay tactics because your intern spent one night playing detective." A few people in the gallery chuckled. Maya kept her eyes on her notes and said nothing. Benton pressed on. "This is not theatrics. We are raising serious concerns about chain of custody and evidentiary reliability." Whitmore folded his hands and looked down at him as though the matter bored him. and I am rejecting them. The state's submissions have been certified. Move on." The prosecutor stood with the easy posture of a man whose path had already been cleared. "The state calls Dr. Melissa Harmon." The medical examiner took the stand in a cream suit with pearls at her throat. Her voice was calm, polished, and practiced. Maya watched every movement as Dr. Harmon testified that the victim had died from a single stab wound to the chest and estimated the time of death between 10:25 and 10:40 p.m. Benton stood for cross-examination. "Dr. Harmon, is it correct that your original report included a wider estimated range?" Before she could answer, the prosecutor rose. "Objection. Relevance. Overruled," Whitmore said at first, and Maya felt a brief flicker of hope. Then he added, "But keep it narrow, Mr. Benton. We are not retrying preliminary paperwork." Dr. Harmon adjusted her glasses. "Early estimates are routinely refined." "Refined," Benton repeated. "Or revised?" "Refined. And the amended report was entered after your signature?" The prosecutor stood again. "Objection. Foundation. Sustained," Whitmore said immediately. Benton's jaw tightened. No further questions. One witness after another, the state continued building its case with polished efficiency. A forensic video technician authenticated security footage from a delivery camera near the alley, even though the most important 12 seconds were missing behind what he called signal distortion. A police detective described Robert's arrest with practiced confidence and carefully avoided mentioning that no murder weapon had ever been found. Leonard Pike returned to the stand and repeated his lie with even more certainty than the day before. His story smoother now, as if one night of rehearsal had made him stronger. Each time Benton objected, Whitmore shut him down almost immediately. Asked and answered. Lack of foundation. Argumentative. Beyond the scope. The rulings came so quickly they sounded rehearsed. Maya wrote down every one of them. By noon, the jury looked different from the day before. They looked less uncertain and more settled. One older white man in the front row had begun nodding along to the prosecution's timeline. A woman near the end of the box kept glancing at Robert with that terrible expression people used when they had already decided someone was guilty but still wanted to seem thoughtful about it. Maya felt sick watching it happen. This was how a lie hardened in a courtroom. It did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened layer by layer, tone by tone, repetition by repetition, until authority started sounding like truth. If you feel for Maya and her father right now, please hit like on this video. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because someone near you might be watching this same story with you tonight. By the lunch recess, Benton looked worn down. He and Maya stood near the old brass elevators outside the courtroom while reporters gathered farther down the hall. Someone walked past carrying 2 styrofoam cups of courthouse coffee that smelled burnt and metallic. A vending machine hummed somewhere below them. The whole building felt old and indifferent, like a place that had watched people beg for justice for so long that it no longer listened. They're burying us, Benton muttered. Maya opened the evidence binder and pointed to the time grid she had redrawn the night before. No, they're rushing. That's different. He rubbed his jaw and looked at the page. I'm listening. She tapped the columns one by one. They don't have a murder weapon. They don't have a clean travel path. They're relying on a compressed timeline, a polished eyewitness, and a revised medical estimate that suddenly narrows just enough to fit my father. Benton studied the page in silence. The jury still likes certainty more than precision. Then we take certainty away from them, Maya said. He looked at her for a long moment. How? She turned another page. Pike changed his story after the amended forensic report was entered. Harmon's report changed after signature, and the surveillance gap appears exactly where the state needs ambiguity most. She lowered her voice. This doesn't just feel coordinated. It feels fed. Fed by who? Benton asked. Maya looked back toward the courtroom doors. Judge Harold Whitmore had just stepped out of chambers, his robe trailing behind him as he spoke quietly with the prosecutor like 2 men discussing something ordinary instead of a human life. Someone who already knows which facts matter, Maya said. Someone who knows how to make a lie survive procedure. Benton followed her gaze and said nothing. At the far end of the hall, deputies began moving Robert back toward holding. He caught Maya's eye as he passed. Even with chains at his wrists and waist, he still carried himself like a man who had spent 30 years cleaning up other people's messes without complaint. His dignity was the one thing they had not managed to strip from him. Maya watched him disappear behind the secured door and slowly closed the binder. Yesterday they had humiliated her. Today they were trying to turn that humiliation into proof that she had been wrong. But the more the state presented, the less she believed this case had begun with her father at all. Robert Williams was not the center of the story. He was simply the convenient ending. The real story had started somewhere earlier, somewhere higher up, at the point where the evidence first began to change shape. If Maya wanted to save her father, she would have to go there. When court reconvened that afternoon, the state would keep tightening its polished case around Robert's neck. She knew that now, but she knew something else too, with a certainty that settled cold and steady in her bones. The case against her father had not been built in a police station. It had been built much higher up than that. The afternoon session ended the way bad weather settled over a lake, slowly, heavily, with the certainty that worse was still coming. By 4:30, the jury had heard enough polished testimony to begin mistaking repetition for truth. Maya could see it in their faces as they filed out. They no longer looked like 12 strangers trying to understand a case. They looked like people being taught what to believe. Leonard Pike's confidence had helped. So had Dr. Harmon's narrow timeline, and the grainy alley footage the prosecutor kept replaying with solemn pauses, as if distortion itself were proof. But more than any of that, it was Whitmore's control of the room that frightened Maya most. He did not simply rule on evidence. He shaped the temperature around it. He made the state sound orderly, and the defense sound desperate. In front of a jury, that difference could bury a man. Robert was led away before she could reach him. He turned once at the side door, gave her the faintest nod, and disappeared behind reinforced glass and courthouse steel. Maya stood there with her binders in her arms until Benton touched her elbow. "Come on," he said. "We've got maybe 4 hours before the cleaning crew starts throwing us out." Back in the public defender's office, evening settled fast. The daytime noise drained away and left behind the low hum of fluorescent lights, the clack of one distant keyboard, and the stale smell of burned coffee that had been sitting on a warmer too long. The younger attorneys had gone. The investigators had gone. Even the receptionist's desk stood dark. The office looked what it really was after hours, a tired machine kept alive by people too stubborn to quit. Maya set the evidence binders across the conference table. Benton loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and dropped into a chair with the expression of a man bracing for impact. "All right," he said. "Start from the top. Assume I'm stupid. You're not stupid. Tonight I am. Explain it like I'm tired, old, and underpaid." A small, humorless smile touched Maya's mouth. Then she opened the first binder. "The state's case depends on 3 things," she said. "The witness, the timeline, and the visual impression created by the alley footage. None of those things stands up without the others." Benton nodded once. "Go on." She laid out 3 documents side by side. "This is Pike's original statement from March 15th. Parking lot. Roughly 9:50 p.m. No claim that he saw a stabbing, just shouting." She set the amended statement beside it. This version was entered later. "Alley. 10:30. Now he claims he saw the actual murder." Benton leaned forward. "Same witness. Same event. Entirely different story." "Exactly." She turned to the forensic report. "Now look at Harmon's first estimate. Time of death. Approximately 10 to 10:45. Wide range. Reasonable range. Then suddenly the amended version narrows it to 10:25 to 10:40. So the witness moves later, and the medical estimate tightens later," Benton said. "Yes, they converge." He let out a low breath. "Too convenient." Maya nodded. "And the surveillance footage fills in the emotional gap. Grainy figure in the alley, dark jacket, same general build as my father. It doesn't prove anything clearly, but combined with the revised timeline, it feels convincing." Benton sat back. To a jury, feeling convincing is usually enough. Maya turned the page and showed him her handwritten travel reconstruction. It shouldn't be enough here. If Robert badged out at 10:12, then to make the prosecution's story work, he has to leave the courthouse basement, walk to the bus stop or find a ride immediately, reach West Jackson by 10:31, confront the victim, kill him, and vanish. No delays, no uncertainty, no real city traffic, no human mess. Benton studied the page for several seconds. What if he drove? He didn't. You know he didn't. His car's transmission has been dead for 6 months. That's not in evidence. It should be. He looked at her, and for the first time that day, she saw not just fatigue in his face, but respect. You're thinking like a trial lawyer. Maya looked down at the bruise-shadowed knuckles of her own hands. I'm thinking like a daughter who watched her father get buried alive. The words stayed in the room between them for a moment. Benton cleared his throat. All right. Best case scenario, we're right. Someone has tightened the state's case after the fact. That still leaves us with the same problem. Which is, he gave her a flat look. Who? Judges don't reverse themselves, because an intern says something smells wrong. At that, Maya opened her mother's leather notebook and pulled a folded sheet from the inside pocket. Then I stop being the intern who smells something wrong and become the person who proves where it started. He took the sheet. It was a copy of the evidence log from intake. His eyes moved down the page. What am I looking at? Chain of access, Maya said. The amended forensic file wasn't just uploaded after signature. It was accessed from a restricted judicial terminal before being entered into the clerk's system. Benton looked up sharply. A judicial terminal? She nodded. I checked the case management stamp. It isn't a public defender terminal. It isn't the state's filing desk either. It routes through an internal court administration node. His voice lowered. You pulled this from where? From the metadata screen the prosecutor forgot to redact in the digital disclosure packet. He stared at her, half impressed, half alarmed. Maya, I know. No one said Whitmore's name. Not yet. It felt too large to say without proof. Outside the office window, the sky had turned the deep blue-black of a Chicago night before rain. Headlights moved across wet streets below, smearing in the glass like streaks of melted gold. Benton stood and began pacing. If court administration touched the file, that could still mean a clerk, a systems officer, someone in records. It could, Maya said. But then why deny every continuance? Why shut down every chain of custody question before it breathes? Why humiliate me before the jury ever hears the argument? His silence was answer enough, because someone in authority already knew what the defense might find. Maya opened the second binder. There's more. She slid over a copy of the victim's employment information. Benton frowned. What is this? Personnel records. Limited extract only. I had a friend in records confirm the employment dates. He scanned the page, then looked up slowly. The victim worked in the courthouse? Yes. As what? Maya met his eyes. Janitorial staff. Same overnight building rotation as my father. Different floor assignments. Same department. For a second, Benton simply stared. Why in God's name was that never foregrounded? Because the state doesn't want the jury thinking about what my father and the victim had in common. They want them imagining a fight in an alley between two angry men. They do not want them wondering what two courthouse janitors might have seen while working after hours in a building full of judges, clerks, sealed records, and closed-door meetings. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hall an old radiator knocked once, then went quiet again. Benton sat back down slowly. You think the murder started inside the courthouse? I think whatever put my father in that chair started here, Maya said. Maybe before the victim ever died. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. This is bad. It's worse than bad. How much worse? Maya hesitated. Then she reached for the last document clipped inside the notebook. It was a handwritten note her father had once shoved into a drawer and forgotten there. The kind of scrap a tired man kept because he meant to deal with it later. She had found it in their apartment the night after his arrest, while detectives were still carrying out boxes. 2 words were written across the top in Robert's blocky hand. Ask Leon. Below that were 3 more. 3rd floor? Chambers, Cash. Benton read it twice. Leon, he said quietly. The victim. Maya nodded. And Chambers, her face had gone cold. In this building, she said. That word only means one thing. Benton looked toward the dark courthouse across the street, as if he could see through stone, through chambers, through years of closed doors and sealed habits. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, more careful. If this touches a judge, we are standing in front of something that can crush both of us. Maya thought of the marble floor, of blood warming her skin, of the bailiff's hand at her wrist, of Whitmore's calm while it happened. She thought of her father in chains, asking for mercy not for himself, but for her. Then she looked back at the files. It's already trying. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Benton pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and clicked his pen. All right, he said. Tomorrow morning I make another record request and get denied again. While they're busy laughing at me in open court, you go downstairs to archives and find out who cleared the amended file through judicial access. Maya nodded once. And if I'm right? Benton's expression hardened. Then somebody changed these files after they were supposed to be untouchable. And once that's true, the rest of the case starts cracking. The office fell quiet again. Maya gathered the papers, but she did it differently now. Less like someone sorting contradictions, more like someone assembling a map. The state had tried to tell one clean story, yet every clean line pointed back toward the courthouse itself, toward the floors where ordinary people kept their heads down, and powerful men assumed no one below them was paying attention. Her father had spent half his life mopping those floors. Maybe that had been his real mistake. Near 9 o'clock, Benton left to call in a favor with records. Maya stayed behind another half hour, reorganizing the binders into new sections. Trial story, real timeline, courthouse link. Before she packed up, she wrote one line at the top of a fresh legal pad in thick black ink. Who needed Robert silent? She stared at it until the question became something heavier than strategy, something personal. Because by then, she knew this much for certain. The case against her father had not been improvised. It had been prepared, fed, protected, and somewhere inside the courthouse, behind polished wood and old traditions, someone had decided Robert Williams was easier to sacrifice than whatever truth he carried. That night, for the first time, Maya stopped asking whether the system was broken. She started asking who was using it like a weapon. By 8 the next morning, the Cook County Criminal Courthouse had the same hard look it always wore in bad weather. The sky above Chicago hung low and gray, and the stone steps were slick from an overnight drizzle that had never quite turned into rain. Lawyers in dark coats hurried through the revolving doors with paper cups in hand. Deputies stood near the metal detectors with the blank faces of men who had long ago stopped believing they were part of anything noble. Maya Williams climbed the front steps, carrying 2 binders, her mother's notebook, and a headache that had started behind her eyes before sunrise. She had slept less than 3 hours. The bruise along her temple had deepened into a yellow-purple crescent despite the makeup she had dabbed over it in the apartment mirror. She saw people glance at it and then glance away. In a courthouse, everybody noticed everything. They just learned early not to say what they saw. Charles Benton was waiting near the security line, tie crooked, coat collar damp. I got records to stall on the first floor, he said quietly. You've got 40 minutes, maybe less, before they start wondering where you are. Maya nodded. Archives? Sub-basement. Clerk access corridor behind records. My friend there is named Gloria Mendoza. 62, Cubs fan. Hates everybody equally. If she helps you, it means she likes your father. Maya almost smiled. That sounds like him. Benton's face softened for half a second. It is him. Then the moment passed, and he looked like a trial lawyer again. Don't ask for anything broad. Broad gets denied. Ask for one person, one file, one date. She tightened her grip on the binder. Leonard Pike? No. Too obvious. Start with the victim. Personnel, floor assignments, emergency contacts, disciplinary notes. Anything that tells you who he was when nobody was writing a murder case around him. He paused. And, Maya? She looked up. If anybody asks, You're delivering a corrected exhibit list to clerk intake. Understood. He headed toward the elevators. She turned toward the clerk corridor. The lower she went in the building, the older it felt. Public corridors gave way to narrower hallways, painted a tired beige that had yellowed with decades of nicotine, radiator heat, and indifference. The polished marble disappeared. The floors turned to scuffed linoleum. A maintenance cart stood parked outside a locked supply room, mop bucket half full, yellow warning sign folded beside it. For one sharp second, Maya saw her father exactly where he belonged in this building, not in chains, not at a defense table, but pushing that cart at 2 a.m, nodding politely to lawyers who never learned his name. The thought almost stopped her. She kept walking. The archives corridor sat behind a frosted glass door labeled Court Records, Authorized Access Only. Inside, rows of metal shelving ran beneath fluorescent lights that flickered just enough to give everyone a headache. The air smelled like dust, paper, and old radiator steam. At the far desk sat a woman in oversized reading glasses with silver hair pinned in a low twist, a Cubs mug by one elbow and a half-finished crossword by the other. "Clerk intake is upstairs," the woman said without looking up. "I'm looking for Gloria Mendoza." That made her glance up. "Depends who's asking." Maya Williams. The name changed something. Not much, but enough. "Robert Williams's girl?" Maya nodded. Gloria studied the bruise on her temple, then the binders in her arms, then the expression on her face. "Your daddy used to bring me peppermints every Christmas," she said. Said the basement air made old records people meaner than judges. She sighed, pushed back her chair, and stood. He wasn't wrong. Maya's throat tightened. "I only need a few minutes. That's what everybody says before asking for the moon." Gloria held out her hand. "What exactly do you want?" Maya repeated Benton's advice almost word for word. "Personnel records for the victim. Floor assignments, work schedule history, emergency contact, any internal notes. Narrow range." Gloria narrowed her eyes. "You got a release?" "No." "Then technically, I should tell you to leave. But you're not going to." Gloria snorted once. "You're young enough to say that like confidence instead of begging. Wait here." She disappeared into the stacks. Maya stood alone among the shelves, listening to the hum of lights and the distant metallic thud of rolling carts. Somewhere above her, muffled through layers of floor and old concrete, the courthouse day was moving forward. Hearings starting, objections being overruled, lives being rearranged by men with calendars. Gloria came back with a thin personnel file and a look that warned Maya not to waste the favor. 5 minutes, she said. "And don't get sentimental on the documents." Maya opened the file at the nearest table. The victim's name was Leon Dobbs, age 56, emergency contact. Sister, Patricia Dobbs, South Shore. Position, night janitorial staff, Cook County Criminal Courthouse. Years of service, 12. Floor assignments rotated. But over the last 2 years, he had spent most of his shifts between the third-floor judicial corridor and the basement records elevator route. Third floor, chambers, cash. Maya's pulse jumped. She turned pages faster. There were the usual HR notes. One written warning from 7 years back for arguing with a supervisor. A commendation for returning a lost wallet containing $800 in cash and not taking a cent. Another note from 3 months ago requesting a transfer off third-floor night rotation due to discomfort with after-hours private meetings extending beyond standard schedule. Discomfort with after-hours private meetings. Maya read the line again. Slower this time. No further explanation. No transfer approved. She flipped to the work schedule history. Her father's name appeared in multiple adjacent assignments. Robert Williams and Leon Dobbs had worked overlapping late shifts for nearly 19 months. Not just co-workers, partners in routine. Men who emptied the same trash cans, waxed the same corridors, checked the same locked doors, and saw the same things powerful people forgot ordinary workers could see. Maya pulled her mother's notebook close and copied everything by hand. Gloria drifted back to the table just as Maya reached the final page. "You found something," the older woman said. Maya looked up. "Did my father ever say anything to you about Leon?" Gloria's expression changed from guarded to careful. "Not directly, but He asked once whether judges were allowed to meet with private visitors after calendar hours. Gloria folded her arms. I told him judges do all kinds of things they're not supposed to do, so long as nobody important wants a record of it. Maya felt cold all at once. When was that? Couple months ago. Maybe 3. Gloria tilted her head. He looked bothered. Not scared yet. Just bothered. Not scared yet. Maya wrote that down too. Do you know which judge? Gloria gave her a dry look. If I knew that, would I still be alive enough to finish my crossword? Before Maya could respond, a door opened at the far end of the corridor. 2 deputy clerks entered, talking in low voices. Gloria moved fast, snatched the file closed, and slid it under a stack of intake folders. Time's up, she said under her breath. Out. Maya gathered her notes and stepped away from the table just as one of the clerks glanced over. Everything okay, Gloria? Depends what you mean by okay, Gloria said, already settling back into her chair. This child delivered the wrong exhibit packet to the wrong floor because apparently literacy is now optional in law schools. The clerk laughed and kept walking. Maya took the cue and moved toward the door without looking back. She did not exhale until she reached the service stairwell. There, alone between concrete walls painted institutional green, she opened the notebook again and reviewed what she had copied. Leon Dobbs had not been some random victim crossing paths with her father by accident. He and Robert had worked the same overnight courthouse shifts for over a year and a half. Dobbs had asked to be moved away from the 3rd-floor judicial corridor because of after-hours private meetings, and her father had scribbled a note linking Leon, Chambers, and Cash. This was no longer a theory built on bad timing and altered files. This was a pattern, and patterns meant people. Maya climbed back to the 1st floor and found Benton outside records, pretending patience while arguing with a clerk over a denied access request he had expected to lose. The moment the clerk retreated, she stepped close and handed him the notebook open to her copied notes. He read in silence. Then he read it again. 3rd-floor Chambers, he murmured. Christ. Leon tried to transfer off that rotation, Maya said. Nobody approved it. My dad and Leon worked the same overnight zone for 19 months. Benton lifted his eyes. So whatever they saw together. Maya nodded. He stared past her toward the bank of elevators where judges, prosecutors, and private attorneys moved in insulated little worlds. Insulated by status, money, and the lazy confidence that nobody below them mattered. Do we know which Chambers? He asked. Not yet. He handed back the notebook. Then that's the next question. The hallway around them had started filling again as the lunch recess thinned. Jurors drifted back from sandwiches and courthouse coffee. Deputies, repositioned by the courtroom doors. Somewhere nearby, a janitor's cart squeaked over tile, and the sound hit Maya so hard it nearly stopped her breathing. For years, men like her father had kept this building clean, while men like Whitmore kept it feared. One group noticed every coffee cup left sweating on conference tables, every ash stain outside service exits, every after-hours visitor who wanted to use the side door and never sign in. The other group counted on being invisible, only upward, never downward. Maybe that had been the fatal mistake. Benton touched her elbow. You all right? Maya looked at the courtroom doors ahead. No, she said, honestly. But I know where to look now. He studied her face for a beat, then nodded once. Good. Because this afternoon the state is going to tighten the noose again. And while they do that, we need to start figuring out what Leon Dobbs died trying to leave behind. Court reconvened 10 minutes later. Whitmore returned to the bench with the same cold composure, the same immaculate robe, the same expression of practiced detachment. If he noticed the renewed steadiness in Maya's posture, he gave no sign. The prosecutor resumed building his tidy version of events, and the jury leaned in as if truth had a script, and he alone had been trusted with the pages. But for the first time since the trial began, Maya was no longer listening only to what they said. She was listening to what had been hidden. A dead janitor, afraid of after-hours meetings on the judicial floor. A father who wrote down 3 words before he was arrested. A courthouse full of powerful people who never imagined the overnight staff were keeping score. By the time court adjourned for the day, Maya knew one thing with absolute certainty. Leon Dobbs had died because he knew something. And somewhere on the 3rd floor, behind a judge's chamber's door. The truth had first learned to wear a robe. The next morning came in hard and silver over Chicago, with a wind off the lake that made the courthouse flags snap like warnings. Maya Williams stood across the street from the Cook County Criminal Courthouse with a paper cup of coffee warming her hands and watched employees filter through the side entrance, reserved for staff. Clerks, deputies, maintenance workers, court reporters, men and women who kept the machinery moving while judges took credit for order. Her father had used that entrance for nearly 17 years. It struck her, not for the first time, that the building had known Robert Williams far longer than any juror ever would. It knew the sound of his mop bucket wheels, the rhythm of his footsteps at 2 a.m, the way he always replaced empty coffee pods in the judge's lounge, even though that was technically someone else's task. The courthouse had trusted him to clean up after everyone. Then the moment he became inconvenient, it swallowed him whole. Charles Benton came up beside her, coat collar raised against the wind. "You look like you're planning to burn the place down." Maya took one last sip of coffee and tossed the cup into a trash can. "I'm planning to follow the money." That earned the smallest shift in his expression. "Good. Because I spent half the night calling in favors, and if I have to hear one more retired assistant U.S. attorney tell me, judicial ethics in Illinois are complicated, I'm going to develop a drinking problem before noon." They crossed the street together. Commuters rushed around them with umbrellas and briefcases, heads down, as if another murder trial were just weather. Inside, the courthouse was already filling. The metal detectors beeped. Deputies barked instructions. Somewhere a child cried. Somewhere else a lawyer laughed too loudly at something that wasn't funny. Benton guided her toward a small side conference room near the public defender bullpen instead of the courtroom. "We've got 45 minutes before the morning session," he said. "Use them." On the table inside, he had laid out a neat stack of documents: corporate registry printouts, campaign finance reports, judicial conference donation records, 3 pages of notes in his sharp block handwriting. Maya set down her binders and began sorting through them. "What is all this?" "The answer to the question nobody ever asks out loud," Benton said. "Who benefits?" He pointed to the first document. "Southlake Corrections Group, private prison operator, 3 facilities in Illinois, 2 more under management contracts in Indiana. They've spent years lobbying for tougher sentencing, especially in counties with overcrowded jail systems and high conviction rates." Maya skimmed the paper. "They donate to judicial campaigns?" "Not directly. That would be too obvious. They fund legal reform foundations, sponsor policy luncheons, underwrite judicial conferences, and pay consulting fees to retired court administrators who happen to remain socially useful." She turned to the next page, a donor list from a judicial symposium held at a hotel near Naperville. Southlake Corrections Group appeared there under a bland subsidiary name. Then another page, and another. The same pattern repeated through shell corporations, charitable arms, advisory boards. It was all legal enough to survive a glance, dirty enough to collapse under sunlight. Maya's eyes moved lower. "Harold Whitmore Foundation for Legal Excellence?" Benton gave a tight nod. "Scholarship fund, banquet dinners, mentorship speeches, nice photographs." Southlake linked money passed through 2 event sponsors into that foundation over 3 years. "How much?" "Enough to buy loyalty. Not enough to look dramatic." Maya sat down slowly. Outside the narrow conference room window, the city moved under a pale morning sky. Taxis, buses, men in wool hats walking too fast against the wind. Ordinary life continuing while she held papers that felt radioactive in her hands. "So Whitmore's taking money." "Maybe," Benton said. "Or maybe money is reaching the world around him in ways designed to leave him room to deny everything. That's how respectable corruption works. Nobody hands over a paper sack in a parking garage unless they're stupid." Maya thought of her father's note. 3rd floor. Chambers. Cash. Or unless somebody saw them. Benton met her eyes. "Exactly." She turned back to the documents and began building the pattern in her mind. Southlake profited from incarceration. Whitmore had a reputation for harsh sentencing, especially in cases involving poor black defendants. Leon Dobbs and Robert Williams had worked the third-floor judicial corridor at night and had apparently witnessed some kind of cash exchange. Leon ended up dead. Robert ended up framed. That was not coincidence anymore. That was structure. Maya pulled her mother's notebook closer and began writing names in columns. Whitmore, Southlake Corrections, subsidiaries, conference sponsors, Legal Excellence Foundation. She drew lines between them until the page began looking less like notes and more like a trap waiting to be sprung. Benton watched her for a moment. "You ever eat breakfast?" She barely looked up. "Not when I'm angry." "That explains a lot." He slid a paper bag across the table. An egg sandwich from the Greek diner around the corner, wrapped in thin white paper that was already going translucent with grease. Maya stared at it. "What?" He shrugged. "You think better when your blood sugar isn't trying to kill you." For a second, the gesture almost undid her. It was such an ordinary kindness, the kind her father would have offered without comment, and it made the room feel suddenly smaller, safer, sadder. She opened the sandwich and took a bite. Warm egg, American cheese, too much pepper, real food. The first thing she had tasted since yesterday afternoon. "Thank you," she said. Benton waved it off. "Tell me what I'm missing." She swallowed and pointed to the donor list. "This isn't just about money reaching Whitmore. It's about incentive. Southlake doesn't need to buy every judge. They just need a few people in the right places who believe high conviction rates are good business." He nodded once. "Keep going. If Leon and my father saw an exchange, actual cash, not just foundation sponsorships, then that means something happened off-book, something too crude to survive disclosure." She turned another page. "And if Leon wanted to talk, he became a problem. If my father was there too, he became the backup problem." Benton leaned against the table, arms folded. "So Leon dies first. Robert gets framed second. Because framing him solves two things at once," Maya said. "It discredits the only surviving witness and makes sure nobody asks what two janitors from the same courthouse were doing near the same secret." A long silence followed. Then Benton said quietly, "You really think Whitmore would kill a man over this?" Maya thought of the courtroom, of Whitmore's face while she bled on the marble, of how easily he had ordered her cuffed, how little human hesitation had crossed his features while Robert begged for mercy. Men did not become monsters in the instant they were exposed. They became monsters long before that. Exposure only let others see it. "Yes," she said. "I do." At 9 o'clock sharp, the hallway outside filled with movement. Court officers called for counsel. Doors opened and shut. Someone down the hall argued over a continuance request in a voice gone hoarse from repetition. Benton gathered the documents into two piles safe to carry and too dangerous to leave lying out. "We can't bring all this into court," he said. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because suspicion is not evidence. And if we tip our hand too early, they'll close whatever doors are still open." Maya hated that he was right, so she carried only the notebook and a narrow folder back into courtroom 4B. The state spent the morning doing what the state always did when it sensed a defense trying to breathe. It pressed harder. A financial crimes analyst testified about Robert's debt load, implying motive without ever saying the word desperation. A police sergeant described the victim as cooperative with authorities, though he was maddeningly vague about which authorities and why. The prosecutor stood with his usual polished solemnity and connected points that only looked connected because Whitmore allowed no one to slow him down. Again and again, Benton rose to object. Again and again, Whitmore overruled him. Maya no longer watched only the witness stand. She watched the judge, the timing of his rulings, the ease with which he excluded anything that might broaden the frame. He never looked rattled, never defensive, only irritated whenever the defense wandered too near the mechanics of how the case had been built. A man protecting process, the jury would think. A man protecting construction, Maya thought. At lunch, while Robert was led back toward holding, he glanced at the notebook in her hand. "You found something," he said quietly. Maya stepped close enough that the deputy had to pretend not to hear. "Did Leon ever say the name Southlake to you?" For the first time in days, real alarm crossed her father's face. His eyes flicked toward the courtroom doors, then back to her. "Not here," he whispered. The deputy tugged his arm. "Move." Robert leaned in one last inch. "Check the judge's charity dinner." Then he was gone. Maya stood rooted to the floor. Benton came up beside her. "What happened?" She turned slowly. "He knows the name." "Southlake?" She nodded. "And he wants us to look at some charity dinner." Benton's jaw tightened. "Then that's where we look." That afternoon, while the jury listened to more carefully polished testimony, Maya sat at the defense table with her pen moving steadily over the page. On the surface, she wrote notes on objections, witness demeanor, and trial procedure. Beneath that, in smaller script, she built a second map. Southlake, Whitmore Foundation, Judge's Charity Dinner. Leon, Robert, cash, third floor chambers. It was no longer just a murder case. It was a business model with blood under it. And somewhere inside that model was the moment Leon Dobbs decided he was no longer willing to stay silent. When court adjourned, Chicago was already turning gold with late afternoon light, the kind that made even government stone look temporarily kind. Maya knew better now. She knew buildings could hold ugliness for decades and still glow beautifully at 5 o'clock. As she and Benton walked back toward the public defender's office, she looked once over her shoulder at the upper floors of the courthouse. Judges' chambers, closed doors, carpets thick enough to quiet footsteps, rooms where men in robes could trade favors and still call themselves honorable before dinner. The courthouse had spent years teaching people like her father to lower their eyes. Maya was done learning that lesson. By the time she reached the office door, she understood something with perfect clarity. If they wanted to save Robert Williams, they would have to prove that Leon Dobbs had not just died because he knew too much. He had died because too many people were making money from what he knew. That evening, Chicago wore the tired look of a city that had worked too long and trusted too little. A cold wind moved through the canyon of government buildings, carrying the smell of wet pavement, bus exhaust, and roasted nuts from a cart near the train station. Maya Williams stood under the courthouse awning with her coat pulled tight around her bruised body and watched the last of the reporters pack up their cameras. Most of them had already decided what story they were telling. Grieving city, murdered witness, quiet janitor accused, sharp young daughter too emotional for the law. Nobody ever had trouble finding a story that fit their appetite. Charles Benton came down the courthouse steps behind her, shoulders slumped from the day's losses. "I made 3 calls on the charity dinner," he said. "One to a retired clerk, one to a campaign consultant, one to a judge's former fundraiser, who now sells expensive wine to people who think regret can be decanted." Maya glanced at him. And apparently your Honor's little foundation hosted an annual legal scholarship banquet at the Drake for years. Judges, donors, reform advocates, all the right smiles in the right room. He handed her a folded notepad sheet. Southlake Corrections sponsored one of the cocktail receptions 18 months ago. Maya opened the page under the weak gray light. There it was again. Another thin thread tying private prison money to Harold Whitmore's respectable public life. 18 months, she repeated. Same period my father and Leon started overlapping on third-floor night rotation. Benton nodded grimly, which suggests timing. Not proof, but timing. Maya stared across the street at the courthouse windows beginning to glow amber from within. Somewhere up there, men and women in robes were finishing calendars, dictating notes, heading to quiet dinners. Somewhere up there, her father had spent years emptying trash cans and replacing burned-out bulbs while learning things no one thought to hide from him. "Leon knew enough to get killed," she said softly. "My father knew enough to get framed." Benton looked at her, then away. "Let's go see if the dead man left anything for the living." Patricia Dobbs lived on the south side in a brick 2-flat with peeling white trim and a front porch crowded by dead winter planters. It was the kind of Chicago building that held generations without ever seeming to change shape. A porch light buzzed overhead as Maya and Benton climbed the steps. Somewhere inside, a television murmured low beneath the clatter of dishes. Maya knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then locks turned, slow and careful, and the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 60s, with tired eyes and a maroon house sweater buttoned wrong at the top. She looked first at Benton's suit, then at Maya's bruise, then at the folder in Maya's hands. I already talked to the police. Maya kept her voice gentle. We're not the police. Then you're too late. She started to close the door. Maya spoke fast. My father worked with Leon. That made the woman stop. Robert Williams? She asked. Maya nodded. I'm his daughter. Something old and sorrowful moved across Patricia Dobbs's face. She stepped back without a word and let them in. The apartment smelled like onions, furniture polish, and the faint medicinal scent of old grief. Family photos covered nearly every wall. Leon in a church suit beside a folding table full of potato salad and baked beans. Leon holding a fish on a dock somewhere in Indiana. Leon in courthouse work clothes, laughing at something just outside the frame. In every picture, he looked like the kind of man people described, with words like steady and decent, after they were gone. Patricia led them into a narrow living room and motioned for them to sit. You want coffee? Benton said yes before Maya could answer. It was such an old-fashioned courtesy, offered in the middle of pain, that it almost broke her heart. Patricia returned a minute later with 3 mismatched mugs and sat across from them in a vinyl-backed chair. My brother didn't trust the police, she said without preamble. Never did. Said once they pick a version they like, they don't investigate. They decorate. Maya felt Benton's eyes flick toward her. Did Leon tell you he was afraid? Maya asked. Patricia wrapped both hands around her coffee. He told me he was tired. That's what men his age say when they mean afraid. Her gaze moved to the bruise at Maya's temple. Looks like you already know something about that. Maya ignored the heat rising in her face. Did he ever mention South Lake Corrections? A legal scholarship dinner? Judges' chambers? Patricia's fingers tightened on the mug. Not much. Not dramatic. Just enough. Yes, she said. The room went very still. What did he say? Benton asked. Patricia looked toward the hallway as though checking that the dead were staying where they belonged. About a year ago, he started carrying around a little pocket recorder. Cheap thing from Walgreens. Said if a man spends his whole life being invisible, sometimes the only weapon left is making sure somebody hears what he heard. Maya leaned forward. Do you still have it? I might. Patricia looked down into her coffee. He told me if anything happened to him, I was supposed to give it to a reporter or a preacher. Somebody noisy. But then he died. And before I could think straight, the police were all over my apartment, asking whether Robert had ever come by angry. Her mouth twisted. Funny how quickly they knew which question they wanted. Mrs. Dobbs, Maya said carefully, my father is being framed for Leon's murder. Patricia looked up sharply. I know. Maya blinked. You know? That man mopped floors with my brother for years. They ate bologna sandwiches in the freight elevator at midnight and split aspirin when their knees got bad. Robert Williams didn't kill Leon. Her voice hardened. But somebody wanted me to say he did. I wouldn't. Benton set his mug down. Did Leon ever tell you what he and Robert saw? Patricia hesitated long enough that Maya could hear the old radiator ticking in the next room. Then she stood. Wait here. She disappeared down the hall. Maya's heart began to pound. When Patricia returned, she carried a small floral tin with rust at the hinge. It had probably once held sewing supplies or Christmas cookies. She set it carefully on the coffee table between them and opened it. Inside lay a cheap digital voice recorder, 2 folded receipts, a courthouse visitor sticker, and a yellow church envelope with Leon's handwriting on the front. If I'm gone, don't trust nobody in a robe. Maya stopped breathing for one terrible second. Patricia picked up the recorder but did not hand it over. There's only one file on here. I listened once. That was enough. Can we hear it? Maya asked. Patricia looked at her for a long moment, deciding not whether Maya deserved it, but whether the truth did. Then she pressed play. Static crackled first. A rustle of fabric. A distant hum, maybe ventilation or a hallway unit. Then voices. The first one was Leon's, lower than Maya expected, careful and breathy as if he were hiding while he spoke. That's him, Patricia whispered. A second voice entered. I've already done my part, the voice said. Southlake will get the numbers they paid for. Maya's skin prickled. Another voice, fainter, answered. Then we need the next round locked in before the quarter closes. Paper shuffled. A drawer slid. Something heavy landed on wood. Cash. Leon breathed too sharply into the microphone. Then the first voice spoke again, irritated now. "Tell your people to stop calling Chambers directly. I won't have clerks noticing patterns." This time Maya knew, not from the words, from the cadence, from the dry patrician bite on certain consonants, from hearing that voice tell a bailiff to cuff her while she bled. Harold Whitmore. Her fingers dug into her knees so hard it hurt. The recording continued. A chair moved. Someone nearer to Leon muttered, "We should go." Then footsteps. Then a brief scraping sound as if Leon had pulled back too fast against a wall. The recorder cut off. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Patricia finally set the device back in the tin with unsteady hands. "My brother came over the next day and said if anything happened to him, it wasn't random. He said Robert heard part of it too, but not all." Maya looked up sharply. "My father was there?" Patricia nodded. "He was working the other end of the floor and came around when Leon signaled him. Leon said they both knew enough to be scared, but he knew more because he stayed longer." Benton's face had gone pale in that particular way older white men did when corruption stopped being abstract and began wearing a specific, expensive voice. "My God," he murmured. Maya could barely hear him over the roaring in her head. Whitmore hadn't merely protected a bad case. He had sold outcomes, sold bodies, sold years of people's lives to a private prison company for profit, and called it sentencing. And Leon Dobbs had died because he heard the price. Patricia slid the church envelope toward Maya. "There's a name in there." Leon wrote it after he heard them talking. "Didn't mean anything to me." Maya opened it carefully. Inside, on a torn piece of paper, Leon had written one line in shaky block letters. "Judge Whitmore took cash from Southlake after the Gold Justice Dinner." The Gold Justice Dinner. Maya stared at the words. Benton whispered, "That's the charity banquet." Patricia looked from one to the other. "Can this save Robert?" Maya lifted her eyes. Not long ago, she would have answered like a student, careful, qualified, respectful of process. But process had handcuffed her, bloodied her, and nearly buried her father under a polished lie. "Yes," she said, "if they don't kill the truth first." When they left the apartment an hour later, the south side was deep in evening. Porch lights glowed along the block. Somewhere a radio played old soul music low through an open kitchen window. The world felt indecently ordinary for a night that had just split in half. On the sidewalk, Benton stopped beneath a bare-limbed tree and looked at Maya with open alarm. "We cannot sit on that recording. We also can't file it blindly," Maya said. "If we do, it disappears, or gets attacked, or both." He nodded once, reluctantly. "We need authentication. Chain, backup copies, and a place to put it where Whitmore can't reach." They stood there in the cold, each measuring the size of what now sat inside Maya's bag. Her father had not merely witnessed corruption. He had stood near the edge of a machine that monetized black conviction and fed private cells with ruined lives. Leon heard enough to die. Robert heard enough to be sacrificed next. Maya looked up at the dark Chicago sky and thought of the way older people in her neighborhood used to say the city remembered everything even when the courts did not. The missing boys, the sealed files, the men who drank in silence after factory layoffs, the women who kept church hats in boxes because dignity had to be protected somewhere. People over 45 understood that kind of memory. It was not dramatic. It was durable. So was the truth. If you kept it alive long enough. Benton broke the silence. "What now?" Maya put a hand over the strap of her bag, feeling the recorder through leather. "Now," she said, her voice steady in a way it had never been before. "We prove Leon Dobbs died because Harold Whitmore was afraid of what two janitors heard in the dark." Maya barely slept that night. She made 3 copies of Leon Dobbs's recording before midnight. One on a flash drive, Benton sealed in an evidence envelope. One uploaded to a secure cloud folder under a name that looked like tax paperwork, and one stored on an old prepaid phone she wrapped in a grocery bag and taped beneath the sink in her apartment. By 1 a.m, her eyes burned, her temple throbbed, and every sound outside the window made her body tighten. Chicago after midnight had its own vocabulary. Sirens in the distance, tires hissing through wet streets, Somebody arguing 2 buildings over, their words blown thin by the wind. The old radiator in the corner knocking like a bad conscience. She sat at the kitchen table with her mother's notebook open, the voice recorder beside it, and tried to think like a lawyer instead of a daughter. Authentication, chain of custody, corroboration. None of that changed the sick certainty in her stomach. Harold Whitmore's voice was on that recorder. Not maybe, not possibly, not enough to raise concerns. It was him. She could still hear the way he had said it. South Lake will get the numbers they paid for. Calm, businesslike, as if ruined lives were freight shipments and not human beings. As if black men moving through his courtroom in shackles were not sons, fathers, church deacons, bus drivers, janitors, veterans, just numbers owed on a private arrangement. Maya pressed her palms against the table until the shaking eased. The city outside had gone quiet in that heavy way it sometimes did just before rain. She stood, went to the sink, and splashed cold water on her face. In the dim bathroom mirror, she looked older than 20. The bruise at her temple had turned a deep brownish purple under the concealer. Her wrists still showed faint red marks from the cuffs. There was dried fatigue in her eyes. The kind older women in her neighborhood always recognized without asking about. Women who had survived layoffs, bad marriages, funerals, and school board meetings, all with the same posture. Upright, practical, too tired to waste breath on self-pity. She heard her mother's voice then. Not literally, but in memory. When people are scared of what you know, baby, they stop arguing fair. At 2:13 in the morning, Maya finally lay down fully dressed on top of the bedspread, the lamp still on, her phone in her hand. At 3:07, she woke to the sound of something breaking. For one confused second, she thought it was part of a dream. Then came a second crash from the living room. Glass, not loud, but sharp enough to cut sleep clean in half. Maya sat up so quickly the room tilted. Someone was inside. Her pulse slammed into her throat. She slid off the bed without turning on another light and took 2 steps toward the bedroom door before stopping herself. The apartment was small. If she could hear them in the living room, they could hear her too. Another sound. Drawers opening. Papers scattering. Not random. Searching. Maya's gaze shot to the kitchen doorway. The laptop was on the table. Her legal notes were stacked near it. Her father's case binders were in the hall closet. The recorder was not there, thank God, but a person tearing through the apartment wouldn't know that yet. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The line rang. Then a floorboard creaked just outside the bedroom. Maya backed up instinctively. The bedroom door swung open. A man in a dark hood stepped into the frame. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Maya screamed. He lunged. She stumbled backward and swung the lamp from the bedside table with both hands. It clipped his shoulder and shattered against the wall. He cursed, surged forward, and grabbed for her phone. Maya twisted away, but his hand caught her wrist hard enough to make her cry out. "Where is it?" he hissed. She froze. Not money, not jewelry, not the television. Where is it? The recording, she thought. He shoved her toward the dresser. Her hip slammed wood. Pain shot up her side. "I don't know what you're talking about," she gasped. "Don't lie to me." His voice was low, roughened like somebody trying to disguise it. He yanked open the dresser drawer with one hand and sent socks, shirts, and old receipts flying. Maya bolted for the doorway. He caught the back of her blazer and dragged her down. Her knees hit the floor first, then her shoulder. Pain burst hot across her left side. "Stay down!" he snarled. She did not. Panic had burned clean through fear now. She kicked backward, hard and wild, and connected with his shin. He cursed again. She crawled toward the hallway, reached the kitchen threshold, and saw the apartment in a flash of sickening detail. Cabinet doors open, papers everywhere, the chair overturned, her laptop gone from the table. The intruder came after her, breath loud now, angry. He seized the chain around her neck. For one terrible second, she thought he was choking her. Then the chain snapped. He held up the small gold cross that had belonged to her mother. The clasp had broken. One arm of the cross bent crooked in his fist. Something changed in Maya then. The fear stayed, but rage came in under it. cold and white and steady. "Give me that," she said. The man looked at her, maybe surprised by the tone more than the words. Then, from somewhere below the building, a dog began barking madly. A neighbor's door opened. Someone shouted, "Everything okay up there?" The intruder swore, dropped the broken necklace, and bolted for the window he had forced open in the living room. By the time Maya reached it, he was already gone into the fire escape dark. 2 minutes later, she was standing in the wreckage of her apartment with a blanket around her shoulders and a uniformed patrol officer asking questions in the detached voice of a man halfway through a long shift. "Did you recognize him?" "No." "Did he take cash?" "I don't know." "Jewelry?" Maya looked down at the bent cross in her palm. "He broke my mother's necklace." The officer nodded like that belonged in a different category from what mattered. "What about electronics?" "My laptop is gone." That got his attention. "Work-related?" "Yes." He scribbled something on his pad. Another officer photographed the broken window and the scattered papers with methodical boredom. In the hallway, Mrs. Alvarez from downstairs stood in her robe and slippers, arms folded tight across her chest, muttering prayers in Spanish every few minutes whenever she looked at Maya. By dawn, the apartment felt violated in a way that went beyond theft. It was not just the mess, it was the precision. The intruder had ignored the television, ignored the cash envelope in the kitchen drawer, ignored the old watch on Robert's dresser. He had taken the laptop, rifled the files, and asked one question: "Where is it?" Benton arrived just after 6 with coffee, a paper sack of bagels, and the expression of a man who had expected trouble, but not this fast. He stopped in the doorway and took in the broken glass, the upturned cushions, the bloodless shock on Maya's face. Jesus. She sat at the kitchen table holding the broken cross in her hand. "They know," she said. Benton set everything down slowly. "Tell me exactly what happened." She did. He did not interrupt. Not once. When she finished, he looked at the empty spot on the table where the laptop had been, and then at the cross in her hand. "They were looking for the recording." "Yes, and they didn't find it." "No." He exhaled once, sharply. "Good." Maya laughed then, but there was no humor in it, just exhaustion stretched too thin. "Good?" He pulled out a chair across from her. "They're panicking. They broke into my home." "I know. They grabbed me. They took my work. They broke the only thing I had left from my mother." Her voice cracked on the last word, despite every effort to keep it steady. "And you're telling me that's good?" Benton's face softened, and suddenly he looked less like a lawyer than a tired older man who had spent too many years watching bad systems hurt decent people. "No," he said quietly. "I'm telling you it means you're close." That should have strengthened her. Instead, it hollowed her out. Maya looked around the apartment at the drawers hanging open, the floor buried under papers, the window still covered in taped plastic that fluttered every time the morning wind pressed against it. Her father was in jail. A judge wanted him buried. A dead man's voice recorder sat hidden because a powerful man had likely ordered a murder. And now strangers were climbing through her window in the middle of the night, asking where the truth was stored. For the first time since this began, quitting did not feel like cowardice. It felt like survival. "I can't do this," she whispered. Benton did not answer immediately. Outside, somewhere in the alley, the garbage truck began its weekly clattering grind. Ordinary noise, ordinary city life, the sound of people waking up and carrying on because bills still needed paying and buses still needed catching, no matter whose world had cracked open overnight. Finally, Benton said, "You can." She shook her head. "No, I can't. They got into my apartment. They know where I live. My father's already paying for what he saw, and now they're going to come after me until there's nothing left." Benton's gaze dropped to the cross in her hand. "Your mother was a school secretary, right?" Maya blinked at the change of subject. "Yes. My mother waited tables for 36 years in Joliet. Double shifts. Bad knees. Never once called herself strong." He leaned back slightly. "Women like that don't raise daughters who quit because men in robes got ugly." Maya stared at him. The room stayed quiet except for the soft flap of plastic over the broken window. He slid the bagel sack toward her. "Eat something. Then we make a police report we don't trust. Replace your laptop, and move the recorder again. She looked at the broken cross once more. One arm bent, clasp snapped, chain twisted, ruined, but not destroyed. Slowly, she set it on the table. Then she reached for the bagel. Not because she was hungry, because she was not done. By the time the courthouse clock struck 8 across the street, Maya had showered, borrowed one of her father's old zip-up jackets to cover the bruise on her shoulder, and packed her notebook, copied files, and the recorder into 3 separate bags. Benton made 2 phone calls from the apartment, one to a digital forensics contact, another to someone he trusted in judicial security, even though, from the look on his face, trust was becoming an expensive habit. At the door, Maya paused and looked back once at the wrecked apartment. Last night, she had still imagined the people on the other side of this might prefer silence, pressure, intimidation. Now she knew better. They were afraid enough to send a man through her window. That changed the equation. When she stepped out into the cold Chicago morning, she did not feel braver. She felt harder, and that, she suspected, might matter more. By the time Maya Williams stepped back into the courthouse that morning, the building looked exactly as it always had: solid, official, self-assured. That was the cruelest part of institutions, she thought. They could absorb blood, fear, bribery, humiliation, and still stand there in polished stone, pretending to represent order. Her shoulder ached beneath her father's old zip-up jacket. The bruise at her temple had faded into a darker, duller color, but the tenderness remained. Every time she turned her head too quickly, she felt it. The broken cross lay in her coat pocket, wrapped in a folded napkin from the diner downstairs. She had almost left it behind in the apartment, but something in her would not allow that. Some things, once broken, had to be carried anyway. Charles Benton met her near the security line with a fresh ID badge clipped to a temporary lanyard and a look on his face that told her trouble had arrived before she had. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He did not answer until they were through the metal detectors and walking toward a side hallway, away from the morning crowds. "Your internship access was suspended at 7:30. Maya stopped. "What?" Benton handed her a printed email. She scanned it once, then again more slowly. "Pending review of conduct concerns and evidentiary irregularities. Miss Maya Williams's courthouse intern credentials are suspended effective immediately. She is prohibited from accessing restricted files, clerk systems, and courtroom support areas until further notice." Signed by the Office of Professional Placement and copied to 3 administrative supervisors she had never met. Her face went cold. "Conduct concerns," she said. Benton's mouth hardened. "The prosecutor filed an internal complaint late last night." Maya looked up sharply. "On what grounds?" He gave a bitter laugh with no humor in it at all. "Unauthorized interference in proceedings, attempted witness influence, mishandling of court-sensitive materials, emotional instability under courtroom pressure." He paused. That last phrase was a nice touch. For a moment, she could not speak. The hallway around them pulsed with courthouse life. Lawyers rushed past carrying files. A deputy escorted a young man in county blues toward holding. Somewhere nearby, a secretary laughed too brightly at something a judge had said. The building continued its business, as if it had not just reached inside Maya's future and tried to snap it clean in half. "He's trying to discredit me before we bring anything forward," she said. "He's trying to make sure that when you do bring it forward, you sound like a damaged girl with a vendetta, instead of the smartest person in the room." Maya looked down at the email again. The language was polished, respectable. Exactly the kind of bureaucratic language older people distrusted on instinct because they had lived long enough to know how polite words could hide ugly intentions. "You said, copied to administrators," she murmured. "Who else saw this?" "Enough people." She folded the paper once and handed it back. "Then we keep going." Benton looked at her for a second, not surprised but perhaps a little relieved. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." They made it to the public defender's office just before 9. The bullpen, usually loud in a familiar, overworked way, felt different that morning. Too quiet in pockets. Too many glances cut short when Maya walked past. A legal assistant who usually said hello to everyone suddenly became fascinated by her printer tray. One of the younger interns looked at the bruise on Maya's temple, then at the temporary courthouse memo clipped to the office board, and quickly looked away. News traveled fast in places built on paperwork. Shame traveled faster. At her desk, Maya found her office login already disabled. When she typed her password out of habit, the screen flashed "Access restricted." She stared at it for one long second, then shut the laptop. Across the aisle, a woman named Cheryl from intake came over with a paper cup of coffee and set it gently beside Maya's elbow. "I didn't hear this from me," Cheryl said under her breath. "But they're saying the complaint came straight from the state's office before dawn. That's not normal." "No," Maya said. "It isn't." Cheryl glanced around and lowered her voice further. "Your daddy used to fix the jam in the staff copier on the 3rd floor because nobody else had the patience. He was kind to people. Nobody important noticed." She hesitated. "Some of us remember that." Then she walked away before Maya could thank her. That almost hurt more than the silence from everyone else. At 10 o'clock, Benton was called into a closed-door meeting with the chief public defender. He came out 35 minutes later looking as if he had aged 3 years. "Well?" Maya asked. He shut the office door behind him before answering. "They want me off the case." Her breath caught. "Can they do that?" "They can try." "Why?" "Because the state has suggested I'm allowing personal entanglement to compromise professional judgment." Maya stared at him. "Personal entanglement?" He spread his hands. Apparently trusting a brilliant intern who happens to be the defendant's daughter now qualifies as ethical instability. Anger rose in her so fast it almost made her dizzy. "This is retaliation." "Yes. For what we know." "Yes. And what did you tell them?" A flicker of old steel entered his face. "That if they want me off this case, they can put it in writing and explain to a judge why they removed the only attorney willing to challenge altered evidence." He paused. They did not enjoy that. Despite everything, Maya nearly smiled. Then the smile died. "But they can still bury you." "Oh, absolutely." He said it so dryly that for one second she heard the older generation in him, not dramatic, not self-pitying, just clear-eyed in the way people became after enough years of seeing power protect itself. He sat down across from her and lowered his voice. "I need you to understand something. This is the part where institutions start closing ranks. Not because everyone is evil. Most people aren't. They're tired. They've got mortgages and bad backs and kids in community college. They tell themselves one ugly thing isn't worth losing everything over." Maya thought of the people in the office who would not meet her eye. "They don't want to be next," she said. "No." Benton glanced toward the bullpen. "And after what happened to you last night, I can't exactly blame them for that." She looked away. The truth of that landed harder than the insult. By noon, the chill around her had become unmistakable. 2 paralegals who normally shared lunch gossip in the break room fell silent when she entered. One older investigator, a black man with gray at his temples named Warren, squeezed her shoulder once as he passed and said nothing at all. That silence meant more than comfort. It meant caution. It meant he believed her enough to care, but not enough to say so where walls might have ears. Maya took her lunch outside to the courthouse steps. A ham sandwich from the vending area sat untouched in her lap while buses groaned past and office workers hurried by in wool coats. Across the plaza, an elderly couple stood near a hot dog cart sharing 1 cup of coffee between them. They looked like the sort of people who had seen whole decades of promises fail and had adjusted without ever quite surrendering. People over 45 recognized public humiliation differently than the young did. They knew it lingered. They knew it could cost jobs, standing, and sleep, but they also knew some things mattered after the embarrassment faded. Maya wondered what they would see if they looked at her long enough. A reckless girl, a daughter fighting too hard, or someone standing where too many before her had already been told to stand down. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She nearly ignored it, then answered. A woman's voice came low and tight on the other end. "You don't know me, but stop talking to Patricia Dobbs." Maya sat up straighter. "Who is this?" She already lost one man in her family. "Don't make her bury another." The line went dead. For a second, the city noise around her seemed to recede. Threats now came in layers. Home, work, witnesses. She put the phone down slowly. When she returned upstairs, Benton was waiting in the conference room with the recorder, Patricia's envelope, and a small digital waveform printout from the forensics contact. "Good news and bad news," he said. "Start with the good. The recording is clean enough for expert enhancement, and our contact says the primary voice can likely be compared if we can get a known sample." Maya thought immediately of Whitmore speaking on the bench, at symposiums, on archived judicial panels. And the bad? Benton slid another paper toward her. It was an internal memorandum from the internship program. More formal language, more polished concern. Recommendation for termination pending investigation. This time, at the bottom, the copied recipients included the law school dean's office. For the first time all day, something in Maya wavered, not because she had not expected retaliation, because they were moving so fast. This was not just about her father now. They were reaching backward and forward at once, trying to erase her credibility in the present and poison her future before she ever got to speak. "My degree," she said quietly. "They're threatening the pathway, yes." She sat down because her knees suddenly felt unreliable. Benton did not try to soften it. "This is what panic looks like in people who wear suits." She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, and almost like a sob. Then she felt, unexpectedly, the folded napkin in her pocket, the broken cross. She took it out and unwrapped it on the conference table. Benton looked down at it. "My mother wore this every day," Maya said. "When she was sick, she stopped wearing almost all her jewelry because the metal irritated her skin. But she kept this on until the last week." She touched the bent arm of the cross with one fingertip. "I thought when he broke it, that meant something ended." Benton said nothing. Maya looked at the damage again. Bent, snapped at the clasp. Scarred, still a cross, still itself. "No," she said softly. "It means somebody was scared enough to reach for what mattered." She wrapped it again and put it back in her pocket. Outside the conference room, the office moved in low, anxious currents. Phones rang, cases stacked. People kept surviving Monday the way Americans always had, through coffee, bad lighting, and a private agreement not to fall apart until after dinner. Maya stood. "What are you doing?" Benton asked. She picked up the waveform printout and the recorder. "If they want me unstable, I'll be methodical. If they want me discredited, I'll be precise. If they want me gone, they're going to have to do more than whisper behind administrative memos." Benton rose more slowly, his tired eyes fixed on her with something like approval. "That," he said, "is the first smart thing anybody's said in this building all day." By late afternoon, the distance around Maya had become official. Her badge no longer opened internal doors. Her name had been removed from the next day's internship assignment sheet. One of the supervisors passed her in the hall and offered the kind of sympathetic smile people gave when they were already mourning your reputation. But no one had taken the truth from her, and no one had yet stopped her from using it. As the winter light faded beyond the courthouse windows and the city turned the color of old steel, Maya understood what Chapter 8 of her life had become, though she would never have called it that out loud. This was no longer the stage where she expected fairness from the system. This was the stage where she learned exactly how far the system would go to protect a man like Harold Whitmore. And because she now knew that distance, she also knew something else. When she finally struck back, she would have to do it where they could not bury it quietly. By the next morning, the courthouse had begun to feel less like a public building and more like a living thing that had decided Maya Williams was no longer welcome inside it. The security guards still waved lawyers through with practiced boredom. Clerks still moved stacks of files between floors. Jurors still arrived with coffee cups and private opinions. But for Maya, every hallway now carried a subtle message. Watched, marked, unwanted. She entered through the main doors because her intern badge no longer opened the side access points. The line at security moved slowly, full of defendants' families, public defenders, off-duty officers in sports coats, and older women clutching purses and manila folders the way churchgoers held hymnals. One woman in a camel coat glanced at the bruise on Maya's temple, then at the temporary visitor sticker now slapped across her chest, where her intern credentials used to hang. She did not ask questions. She just gave Maya a small, tight nod, the sort older black women gave when they recognized humiliation and understood that naming it out loud sometimes made it worse. Maya returned the nod. Inside, Charles Benton was waiting near the old brass elevators, with a folder tucked beneath one arm and 2 coffees balanced in his hand. "You look like hell," he said. "You say the sweetest things." He handed her one of the cups. "Drink. You're going to need blood in your veins for what comes next." They stepped into an empty conference room just off the public defender bullpen. Benton closed the door, dropped the folder onto the table, and opened it. Inside were 3 photographs, a chain of custody worksheet, a typed statement from Patricia Dobbs, and a 1-page note with a name Maya had not seen before. "Detective Laura Benton." Maya looked up. "Related to you?" "Not unless every tired Irish Catholic in Illinois is family," he said. "She worked homicide 12 years. Good at her job. Bad at pretending not to notice corruption. She looked at Leon Dobbs's murder before the case was steered elsewhere." "Steered by who?" Benton gave her a dry look. "If I knew that for certain, we'd already be in front of federal prosecutors." Maya picked up the photographs. The first showed the alley behind Delaney's liquor, from a wider angle than the version introduced in court. The second showed a close shot of the victim's body location, yellow evidence markers and all. The third made her breath catch. A partial fingerprint sheet, marked unidentified, then struck through in red with a notation: "Exclude from active theory, pending reassessment." She looked up slowly. "Where did this come from?" "Laura Benton kept copies." "That's not exactly procedure." "No," he said. "It's what people do when they think procedure is being used to bury something." Maya felt a hard, quiet pulse of hope. "Where is she?" "She agreed to meet us before court. Off-site. Doesn't trust the building." "She's right." He glanced at his watch. "We've got 25 minutes." They found Detective Laura Benton at a corner diner 3 blocks west of the courthouse. The kind with cracked red booths, old linoleum, and waitresses who called men over 60 on, no matter what the men had done with their lives. Morning light fell thinly through fogged windows. A fryer hissed in the back. 2 retirees in Korean war caps sat at the counter sharing opinions about city taxes and the White Sox. Laura Benton was in her late 50s, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and the face of a woman who had spent years being underestimated and no longer had the patience to find that amusing. She wore no makeup, a navy peacoat, and the expression of someone measuring whether the truth was worth the trouble of saying. When Maya slid into the booth, Laura's eyes went first to the bruise on her temple and then to the coffee she had not yet touched. "So it's true," Laura said. "He put cuffs on you in open court." Maya met her gaze. "He had the bailiff do it." Laura made a low sound that could have been disgust or recognition. "Same difference." Benton sat beside Maya and got straight to it. "Tell her." Laura stirred her coffee once, though she did not add anything to it. "Leon Dobbs's murder came across my desk for 6 hours. That's all I had before it got yanked and reassigned to a team more interested in certainty than evidence." She slid a thin envelope across the table. "I copied what I could." Maya opened it carefully. More photographs. An unfiled field note. A printout of security camera stills from a wider block radius than the court had seen. "I knew the arrest didn't smell right," Laura continued. "No weapon, weak witness, bad timeline. But the part that bothered me most was the body position." Maya looked up. "What about it?" "Your father's too short." For a second, the only sound in the booth was the clink of silverware from the counter. Laura tapped the crime scene photo. Single stab wound, downward angle, chest entry. To make that wound the way the report describes, the attacker was either significantly taller than Robert Williams or standing on something. She sat back. No sign anyone was standing on something in that alley. Maya thought of the original blood spatter estimate. Over 6 feet, which is why they changed the forensic framing, she said. Laura nodded once. "Exactly." Benton leaned forward. "And the fingerprint?" Laura's mouth tightened. "Found on a metal service door near the alley entrance. Partial, but clean enough to compare. It wasn't your father's. It wasn't Leon's. It should have stayed active. Why didn't it?" Laura gave a bitter half-smile. Because someone higher up decided we were no longer building possibilities. We were finalizing a narrative. Maya looked back at the printout. Did you ever run it? I requested the comparison. Then I got reassigned before the result reached me. That landed like a slap. Reassigned by whom? Maya asked. Laura held her gaze. Officially, my lieutenant. Unofficially? She glanced toward the courthouse, visible at the end of the block through the diner window. Let's just say that building has long fingers. The waitress came by then with toast no one had ordered and topped off their coffee as if they were discussing weather instead of murder. That was another American thing Maya had always loved and hated at once. The way ordinary life kept moving beside catastrophe. Syrup bottles, weather talk, senior discounts. Meanwhile, men in robes sold convictions for profit. Laura waited until the waitress moved away. There's one more thing, she said. From inside her coat, she pulled a folded incident sheet and placed it on the table. Maya unfolded it. Employee access, camera review, South Service corridor. Date. The night Leon died. Image capture logs attached. Her pulse kicked up. There were cameras in the South Service corridor? She asked. Not courtroom cameras, Laura said. Maintenance corridor cams. Low priority, no audio. Mostly used when tools go missing, or somebody slips on a wet floor and sues the county. She tapped the paper. One camera caught a figure entering through the judicial side service door, 22 minutes before Leon was killed. Another camera should have caught that figure exiting toward the alley route. Should have? Feed vanished. Benton swore under his breath. Deleted? He asked. Laura shook her head. Not exactly. Requisitioned. Pulled for administrative review and never restored to homicide. By whom? This time, Laura did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the sugar caddy, turned one packet over between her fingers, and finally said, The request originated through Court Administration Security Liaison. The sign-off code traces to a chambers-level authorization. Maya felt the room narrow around her. Judge Whitmore? Laura's expression did not change. I did not say that. You didn't have to. Laura looked at her for a long moment. Be smarter than your anger, kid. Anger gets dramatic. Smart gets admissible. Maya lowered her eyes to the incident sheet again. A hidden corridor camera. Missing footage. A fingerprint excluded from theory. A wound angle inconsistent with her father's height. Each piece alone could be shrugged off. Together they began to feel like structure. A hidden skeleton beneath the polished skin of the case. Benton sat back slowly. Can you testify? Laura looked tired all at once. Not yet. If I step forward too early, I lose access to everything else I still might be able to pull. Maya understood that. It was ugly, but she understood it. This was what survival looked like inside a corrupted system. Never quite enough courage for a clean movie speech. But sometimes, enough quiet decency to slide the truth across a diner table before court. Laura nodded toward the envelope. That's your start. Use it carefully. By the time Maya and Benton left the diner, the morning had sharpened into a brittle cold. The wind off the river made her eyes water. Across the street, courthouse employees were smoking in small clusters by the service entrance, shoulders hunched, talking low. Maya held the envelope inside her coat like it was glass. Back at the office, they spread everything across the conference table. The room looked less like legal prep now and more like an evidence warboard assembled by people who no longer believed procedure would save them. Maya arranged the materials in order. Original homicide report. Partial fingerprint excluded. Service corridor camera requisition. Crime scene angle notes. Patricia's statement. Leon's recorder. Southlake links. Third floor personnel overlap. Then she stopped at the fingerprint sheet. Can we compare this ourselves? Benton frowned. To what? She looked up. Not said yet. But there between them. Whitmore. A judge touched everything and left prints nowhere ordinary people could access. But judges also spoke at conferences, signed ceremonial awards, shook hands at public dinners, sipped water from podium glasses, touched microphones, pens, lecterns, donor plaques, not nowhere, just where no one thought to look. Benton saw the thought form on her face. That's thin. It's a path, he considered. If we can't get his actual print through proper channels, we need something he handled in a setting with controlled access. Maya thought immediately of Robert's whisper from the day before. Check the judge's charity dinner. She turned to the South Lake event materials again. The Gold Justice Dinner. Benton nodded slowly now. Guest registration, podium setup, donor signage, maybe commemorative glassware, programs, backstage access logs, photos, Maya added. High-resolution event photos. If he handled an award or donor plaque, maybe there's something traceable tied to storage. He gave her a long look. You really are your father's daughter. Maya frowned. What does that mean? It means you notice the things people leave behind when they assume the help isn't paying attention. That hit her harder than he probably intended. Her father had spent half his life in corridors where powerful people forgot he existed. Leon had died because that invisibility had limits. Now Maya was using the same forgotten angle. The janitor's angle, the worker's angle, the one from below eye level to take the case apart. Around noon, a clerk dropped off the afternoon witness schedule. Sentencing was still set for the following day, unless the defense produced something extraordinary overnight. Tomorrow. The word hung in the room like a blade. Benton read the schedule and swore softly. They're accelerating. Because they know we're moving. Yes. Maya looked at the board of evidence and felt the pace of it all settle into her bones. There would be no long, elegant investigation. No generous time for second thoughts. They had one day. One narrow, dangerous day. To turn scattered proof into something too public to bury. Outside the conference room window, the Chicago sky had gone white with cold, and the courthouse across the street stood exactly where it always had, certain of its own permanence. Maya no longer believed in permanence, not for innocence, not for reputations, and not, if she had anything left to give, for Harold Whitmore. By late afternoon, as the office lights hummed and the city darkened toward evening, one truth had become unavoidable. They no longer needed to prove only that Robert Williams was innocent. They needed to prove that the system had been altered around a guilty man powerful enough to call it justice. By 9:30 the next morning, the courthouse no longer felt like a place where verdicts were reached. It felt like a stage being reset for an ending someone powerful had already chosen. Maya Williams stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4B with a folder pressed against her ribs and watched the building wake into ceremony. Deputies adjusted their belts and traded tired jokes near the security post. Clerks hurried past, carrying sealed envelopes and coffee cups. Reporters clustered at the far end of the corridor, sensing the gravity of sentencing day even if they did not yet understand its true shape. The polished floors reflected everything without revealing anything. That was the courthouse's gift. It could mirror grief, fear, and corruption in the same cold shine. Charles Benton stepped out of the courtroom and closed the door behind him. They moved sentencing up 20 minutes, he said. Maya stared at him. Can they do that? They just did. He handed her the revised docket slip. Sentencing for Robert Williams had been advanced to 10:10 a.m. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. Her pulse kicked hard once, and then seemed to settle into something sharper. They're trying to close the door before we can walk through it, she said. Yes. Then we stop asking permission. Benton looked at her. Really looked at her. And whatever he saw there must have reassured him, because he gave a short nod. They had spent half the night turning fragments into sequence. Detective Laura Benton's corridor camera memo, Leon Dobbs's recorder, Patricia's sworn statement, the original fingerprint sheet, the wider crime scene images, the South Lake money trail, and, just before dawn, one more piece, a high-resolution event photograph from the Gold Justice Dinner showing Harold Whitmore lifting a crystal donor plaque with his bare hand, smiling beside a South Lake executive under a banner for the Whitmore Foundation for Legal Excellence. The plaque itself had not mattered. What mattered was where it had been stored afterward. In a locked display cabinet at the courthouse's judicial event office, cleaned badly, inventoried even worse, and accessed 1 week ago by a forensics contact. Benton trusted enough to risk his pension on truth. The latent print pulled from the plaque had not been courtroom perfect. It had not needed to be. It was sufficient for comparison, and when matched against the excluded partial from the service door near the alley, it did not whisper. It aligned. Not probability, not maybe. Alignment. Maya still felt the weight of that result inside her like a second skeleton. "Where's my father?" she asked, being brought up now. She closed her eyes for a second. In her mind, she saw Robert exactly as he had looked the first time she was old enough to stay up and wait for him after an overnight shift. Work boots, damp from slush, shoulders sagging, smelling like industrial soap and hallway wax, but still smiling when he saw she had done her homework at the kitchen table. He had spent his life cleaning floors under men who would never have invited him to sit in their offices. Now, one of those men meant to bury him from the bench. No, Maya thought. Not today. The hallway doors opened and a deputy escorted Robert out of the service elevator in waist chain and cuffs. His suit jacket still fit badly over county-issued clothes, but he carried himself with the same stubborn dignity that had defined him all trial. When he saw Maya, his face changed not with relief, exactly, but with the ache of a father who understood his daughter had crossed into danger on his behalf and could no longer be called back. "You all right?" he asked softly, as the deputy paused. It nearly undid her that he was still asking. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" Robert gave the faintest shrug. "I've been better." Then his eyes dropped to the thick folder in her arms. "You found it," he said. Not a question. Maya nodded once. The deputy tugged his chain. "Time." Robert leaned closer by half an inch. "Whatever happens in there, you don't let them turn you into what they say you are." Her throat tightened. "Dad?" "No." His voice deepened just enough to stop her. "Listen to me. Men like that win twice when they steal the truth and your dignity. You hold on to one, even while you fight for the other." Then he was moved inside. Maya stood motionless after he was gone. Benton exhaled slowly. "Your father should have been a preacher. He hates public speaking, which makes it more insulting that he's better at it than most judges." They entered the courtroom at 10:03. The room was packed. The gallery had swelled beyond the usual sentencing crowd. Reporters lined the back wall. A few board members from Whitmore's Scholarship Foundation sat together near the aisle, polished and uneasy. Older courthouse staff had slipped into the benches in twos and threes. Clerks, maintenance workers, retired bailiffs, women from records, people who knew Robert Williams not as a defendant but as the man who had fixed jammed copy machines, replaced hallway light bulbs without being asked, and once stayed late to clean vomit out of a jury room carpet because a nervous witness had gotten sick before testimony. Maya noticed Gloria Mendoza from Archives sitting in the third row with her purse clenched in both hands. At the front, Judge Harold Whitmore took the bench in his black robe with the same measured authority he had worn every day of the trial. If he was worried, it did not show. His silver hair was immaculate. His expression settled somewhere between solemnity and irritation, as though this sentencing were an administrative inconvenience rather than a final act of destruction. The prosecutor rose and began with practiced gravity. "Your Honor, in light of the jury's findings and the severe nature of the offense, the state requests." Benton stood. "Before sentencing, the defense has an emergency motion." Whitmore did not even look surprised. "Denied." "Your Honor, the defense has newly authenticated evidence directly affecting the integrity of both the conviction and the administration of this court." A ripple moved through the gallery. Whitmore's eyes turned to Benton at last, cold and flat. "Mr. Benton, this matter has been litigated. Your office has already exhausted the court's patience." "It is not patience we are exhausting," Benton said. "It is concealment." The room went still. Whitmore leaned back slightly. "Counsel will choose his next word with extraordinary care." Maya could feel every heartbeat in her wrists. This was the point where most people backed down. This was the point where procedure, fear, and hierarchy usually reasserted themselves and reminded ordinary people what they were allowed to risk. Benton did not sit. "Then I choose this one, Your Honor. Corruption." The word seemed to strike the room harder than a shout would have. The prosecutor was on his feet at once. "Objection. Outrageous. This is grandstanding." Maya stood before she could stop herself. "Then let it be on the record," she said, her voice clear enough to carry to the back wall. "Because my father is about to be sentenced for a murder committed to protect a bribery scheme inside this courthouse." A deputy near the rail shifted instinctively. Whitmore's face hardened. "Miss Williams, You have no standing to address this court. Maya stepped into the aisle anyway. Her body shook, but her voice did not. No, but I have evidence. The gallery erupted into whispers. One of the reporters actually took a half step forward. Whitmore raised in his gavel. Sit down at once. Maya did not move. Not this time. Benton slid the emergency motion packet onto the clerk's desk with an audible slap. Your Honor. Attached are a sworn witness statement from Patricia Dobbs, an authenticated audio recording of a conversation involving Southlake Corrections and a Chambers-level participant, a service door fingerprint comparison, and photographic evidence linking the court to an undeclared financial relationship with Southlake through the Gold Justice dinner. Whitmore's jaw twitched. Only once, but Maya saw it. So did the people in the first 2 rows. The prosecutor's confidence faltered for the first time all week. This is procedurally improper. It's procedurally fatal, Benton snapped. If even half of it is true. Whitmore lifted the gavel again. The court will recess while I review. No, Maya said. Every head turned toward her. She stepped farther into the open space between the defense table and the bench, the exact place where, days earlier, she had been humiliated, cuffed, and thrown to the marble like she was less than human. Now she stood there on purpose. If this court recesses, she said, that evidence disappears. Silence. Not Pulit's silence. The dangerous kind. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You are perilously close to contempt. Maya looked directly at him, and for the first time, she did not see only a judge. She saw the man on Leon's recorder, the man who sold convictions, the man who believed janitors could be erased and daughters could be frightened back into place. Then hold me in contempt, she said quietly. But do it after you explain why your fingerprint was found on the service door behind the alley where Leon Dobbs was murdered. The entire courtroom stopped breathing. Even the air seemed to pause. Whitmore did not answer. He did not blink. He only stared at her with the expression of a man realizing that the thing he had spent days crushing beneath his heel had stood back up with a knife made of facts. And in that terrible suspended second, Maya understood something with complete certainty. Sentencing had just ended. The real trial was finally beginning. For one suspended second, after Maya Williams spoke, the entire courtroom seemed to forget how sound worked. No paper rustled. No chair creaked. Even the reporters in the back row, who had spent the week sniffing around the edges of scandal without ever finding its center, stood utterly still. Judge Harold Whitmore remained on the bench with his hand still wrapped around the gavel, but something in his face had changed. It was not fear, not yet. Men like him did not move that quickly into fear. First came disbelief, then calculation, then anger. When calculation began to fail, Charles Benton broke the silence first. Your Honor, he said, each word deliberate now. Sharpened for record, the defense requests immediate suspension of sentencing and emergency transfer of all attached materials to an independent review authority due to direct evidence of judicial corruption, evidence tampering, and homicide-related concealment. The prosecutor found his voice at last. This is insanity, he snapped. An intern with a disciplinary record and a defense attorney already reprimanded for procedural abuse do not get to hijack sentencing because they've assembled a conspiracy collage. Maya did not take her eyes off Whitmore. The judge finally leaned back in his chair. His expression returned in stages, like a mask being fitted back into place by old habit. This court will disregard counsel's theatrics, he said. Any allegations regarding my conduct are improper, unsupported, and plainly designed to contaminate the proceeding after a lawful conviction. It was a good recovery. Measured. Judicial. The voice of order calling disorder by name. It might even have worked if Maya had not already heard that same voice on Leon Dobbs's recorder discussing prison numbers like quarterly sales. Benton lifted one hand toward the clerk's desk, then marked the motion, the exhibits, and the audio file into the record. Whitmore's gaze sharpened. Denied. Maya stepped forward another pace. You can deny the motion, she said, but you can't unmake the evidence. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Gloria Mendoza, seated in the third row, pressed her lips together so tightly the lines around her mouth turned white. Patricia Dobbs sat near the wall with both hands clasped over her purse, as if gripping it were the only thing stopping her from shaking. Reporters were already scribbling. One cameraman at the back had quietly raised his shoulder rig, even though he knew filming in the courtroom would get him thrown out if anyone bothered enforcing the rules. The prosecutor pointed toward Maya with a trembling hand. "Your Honor, she is not authorized to address this court. She should be removed." That was what Whitmore had done before. Removed her. Humiliated her. Let force stand in for truth. But this time the room was too full. Too alert. Too far past pretending nothing unusual was happening. Whitmore's eyes flicked toward the bailiff, then away again. He knew what Maya knew. If he had her dragged out now, in front of reporters, clerks, jurors from the previous phase of trial still lingering in the hall, and a room full of courthouse staff who had already seen her blood once, it would not look like discipline. It would look like panic. So he chose another path. "Very well," he said, voice clipped. "Since Miss Williams is determined to embarrass herself, the court will permit counsel 2 minutes to summarize whatever fantasy he believes has interrupted sentencing." Benton did not sit. He reached into the evidence packet and lifted the first document. Exhibit 1. Statement from Patricia Dobbs, sister of the victim, attesting that Leon Dobbs told her he and Robert Williams overheard a bribery exchange involving Southlake Corrections and a judge's chambers. The prosecutor laughed once, too loudly. "Hearsay. Ordinarily, yes," Benton said. Less so when supported by a contemporaneous recording. He held up the recorder. Something small but unmistakable moved across Whitmore's face then. Not enough for a layperson, perhaps, but enough for Maya. Enough for anyone who had watched him all week. Recognition. Benton set the recorder on the clerk's podium. Exhibit 2. Audio file recovered from Leon Dobbs's personal effects, preserved by his sister, containing the voice of a man this courtroom has heard every day of this trial, stating, quote, "Southlake will get the numbers they paid for." The words hit harder in court than they had in Patricia's living room. Maybe because here, surrounded by flags and seals and legal woodwork, they became what they truly were. Not corruption in the abstract, commerce in human lives. The prosecutor's face went pale, then flushed dark. Whitmore's hand tightened on the gavel. "That recording," he said, "has not been authenticated. Not fully for trial submission yet," Benton replied, "but sufficiently for emergency review, especially when paired with the next 2 exhibits." He lifted the fingerprint comparison. Exhibit 3. The original excluded partial print from the service door near the alley where Leon Dobbs was killed, compared against a latent print, recovered from a commemorative plaque, handled publicly by Judge Whitmore at the Gold Justice dinner. A sound escaped someone in the gallery. Not a word. More like the involuntary breath people made when a fall became visible before impact. Whitmore's voice sharpened. "This is outrageous." "No," Maya said. Every eye turned to her. Her voice was no louder than before, but now it carried with the weight of something already proven in her bones. "What's outrageous is framing my father for the murder of a man who heard you taking money." The prosecutor slammed a hand on counsel table. "That is enough." But Maya was not speaking to him. She was speaking to the room, to the older clerks who had spent decades watching men like Whitmore pass through hallways as if God himself had signed their parking permits, to the bailiffs, who knew which judges stayed late with private visitors, to the reporters whose careers depended on sensing the moment a polished story cracked, to the ordinary citizens in the gallery who had seen too many poor black defendants walk into court already translated into someone else's script. She reached into the file and pulled out the event photo. Southlake Corrections sponsored the Gold Justice dinner through shell-linked funding. Leon Dobbs and Robert Williams worked the judicial corridor that same period. Leon requested a transfer away from after-hours third-floor meetings. Days later, he was dead. My father became the convenient ending. Whitmore struck the bench with his gavel. "Miss Williams, you will stop." She turned to him at last. "No, Your Honor, I won't." A shudder moved through the room. It was not dramatic rebellion people reacted to. It was dignity, calm refusal, the kind that made abuse visible by declining to imitate it. Whitmore rose from the bench. That, more than anything, told Maya she had him. Judges did not stand unless they meant to reclaim the room physically. "This proceeding is suspended," he declared. "The courtroom will clear while I refer these malicious allegations for contempt review and bar discipline." He had chosen recess after all, just as she feared. But before anyone could move, a new voice came from the gallery. That would be a mistake. Heads turned. Detective Laura Benton stood near the back wall, coat still on, badge wallet open in one hand, though she was no longer active homicide. Beside her stood two men Maya did not recognize in dark suits and winter overcoats, carrying the unmistakable stiffness of investigators who lived more in files than in rooms. Laura's eyes were fixed on Whitmore. "I've already transmitted copies of the defense materials, along with chain of custody certification for the corridor camera memo and the excluded print sheet, to the Illinois Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit." The courtroom seemed to tilt. One of the suited men stepped forward and displayed credentials. Special Investigator Daniel Reeves, Public Integrity. The second followed, Thomas Vale. Same office. The prosecutor sat down as if his knees had simply given up on him. Whitmore remained standing, but all the stillness had gone out of him now. What remained looked almost normal to anyone who did not know the signs. Slight color loss around the mouth, fingers flattening against wood, shoulders too square in the way men stood when they no longer trusted the floor. "This is highly irregular," he said. Investigator Reeves nodded once. "That appears to be a pattern here." A few people in the gallery actually gasped at that. Whitmore's gaze snapped toward the bailiff. "Clear this room." But the bailiff did not move. It was the smallest betrayal imaginable, barely visible, a hesitation of less than a second. Yet the whole courtroom felt it. Power depended on obedience, arriving before reflection. Today, reflection had arrived first. Maya looked toward her father. Robert Williams sat at the defense table in chains, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on Whitmore with something deeper than anger. It was recognition, the terrible, quiet recognition of a man seeing at last that the thing he had sensed in fragments, a case built too clean, witnesses arriving too ready, fear hanging over night shifts like damp air, had a face, had a voice, had been looking down on him from a bench the whole time. Whitmore tried one last angle. "These so-called exhibits are the product of theft, coercion, and professional misconduct," he said. "Mr. Benton should be removed from this case immediately, and Miss Williams should consider the criminal consequences of fabricating." "Fabricating?" Patricia Dobbs stood up so fast her purse fell to the floor. Her voice shook, but it filled the courtroom anyway. "My brother buried his fear in a church envelope because he knew none of you would believe a janitor over a judge. He died because he told the truth quietly. This child is only saying it out loud." The effect of those words on the room was immediate and almost physical. Not because Patricia was elegant, because she was not, because she sounded like exactly what she was, an older black woman who had washed dishes, buried family, paid bills late, and lost patience with institutions decades ago. People trusted polished people less than they claimed. They trusted grief when it no longer cared about manners. Whitmore looked at Reeves. "Are you seriously relying on this circus?" Reeves did not answer him directly. Instead, he turned to the clerk. "Please secure the motion packet, the recorder, and all listed exhibits. No materials leave this courtroom." Then, to Whitmore, "Judge, in light of the allegations and preliminary corroboration, we are directing that you step down from active participation pending immediate review." It was not an arrest. Not yet. But it was the first public fracture. Whitmore stared at him. Then, at Maya. There it was at last, the thing that had not appeared when she bled, when she was cuffed, when he denied continuance after continuance, when he watched her future get targeted through memos and whispered complaints. Fear, not large, not cinematic, just a thin, dark line opening where certainty had lived. He spoke through clenched control. "You have no idea what you are doing." Maya held his gauze and answered with the only truth left that mattered. "No, Your Honor. I know exactly what kind of man hides behind that robe." Nobody laughed this time. Nobody even moved, because by then the robe itself had started to look different. Less like authority, more like costume. Less like dignity, more like cover. Whitmore remained standing at the bench while the room around him changed shape. Not quickly, That was the important part. Systems did not reverse themselves in one roar of justice. They shifted in tiny, humiliating increments. A bailiff who hesitated. A clerk who stopped writing and started watching. Investigators who stepped closer instead of backing away. Reporters who no longer framed their notes around sentencing, but around scandal. Older courthouse workers in the gallery who sat a little straighter because for once, someone from below had forced the truth upward. Maya felt all of it, and she knew this still was not the end. But it was the moment the fall began. The first thing Maya noticed after the room turned against Harold Whitmore was how ordinary everything still sounded. A heating vent rattled somewhere high in the courtroom wall. A reporter's pen dropped and clattered against the floor. One of the older women in the gallery coughed into a tissue. The flag near the bench stood perfectly still. For one surreal moment, it felt as if the world was refusing to acknowledge what had just happened, that a man who had worn authority like a second skin was now standing exposed before the same room he had ruled for years. Then, reality began moving again. Special Investigator Daniel Reeves spoke first, his tone level, almost boring, which made it hit harder. "Judge Whitmore, step away from the bench." Whitmore did not move. The black robe seemed to hang differently on him now. Not grand, not judicial, heavy, awkward, like fabric suddenly aware of the body beneath it. "This is an abuse of process," he said. "You are acting on contaminated material, presented through emotional coercion and procedural sabotage." No one answered immediately, because by then the room no longer belonged to his voice. It belonged to the silence after it. Thomas Vale from Public Integrity moved toward the clerk's desk and began gathering the marked exhibits with deliberate care. The recorder, the fingerprint comparison, Patricia Dobbs's statement, the gold Justice Dinner photograph. Every piece was handled like something fragile and explosive at once. Charles Benton remained standing beside the defense table, one hand resting flat against the wood as if grounding himself. Maya could see the fatigue in him now that adrenaline had nowhere left to hide it. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His tie sat crooked, but for the first time since this nightmare began, he did not look beaten. He looked exactly what he was, an older lawyer who had spent enough years inside broken systems to recognize the rare moment when one finally cracked in public. Robert Williams still sat in chains. That detail cut through everything. Even now, with Whitmore cornered and investigators present, and the room visibly shifting, Robert remained shackled like a convicted danger to society. The sight of it made Maya's throat tighten with fresh anger. She turned to Reeves. "My father should not still be in restraints." Reeves looked at Robert, then at the deputy nearest the defense table. "Remove them." The deputy hesitated only a fraction of a second before obeying. Metal clicked. The waist chain came free first, then the wrist cuffs. The sound was small, but to Maya, it felt larger than the gavel had ever sounded. Robert flexed his hands slowly once the cuffs were off. He did not make a speech. He did not rise in triumph. He only lowered his eyes for a moment, as if feeling blood return to parts of himself that had gone numb. Somewhere behind Maya, someone in the gallery began to cry quietly. Whitmore saw it all. The unchaining, the investigators handling evidence, the prosecutor sitting frozen at counsel table, not daring to attach himself to Whitmore's certainty anymore. The older courthouse staff in the gallery no longer looking down. The room had stopped serving him. That, Maya realized, was the real collapse. Not the accusation, not even the evidence. It was the moment obedience failed to arrive. Whitmore stepped down from the bench at last. No one helped him. No one announced anything ceremonial. He simply descended the same short set of steps he had watched defendants descend for years, and when his polished shoes touched the courtroom floor, he looked smaller, still dangerous, still proud, but smaller. He turned once toward Maya. "You think this ends with me?" he asked. His voice had changed, less polished now, more naked. The cultured cadence remained, but bitterness had broken through it. Maya held his gaze. "I think it starts with you." That landed, not because it was clever, because it was true. Whitmore gave a humorless smile. "You have no idea how many people signed their names to this machine. I know enough." "No," he said softly. "You know one face. That's all." Reeves stepped between them before Whitmore could say more. "Judge, save it for counsel." Counsel. The word hung there, almost absurd in its civility. 2 court security officers moved in then. Not rough, not dramatic, but unmistakably firm. They did not handcuff him in front of the room, not yet, but they positioned themselves close enough that everyone understood what was happening. Harold Whitmore was no longer directing the scene. He was being escorted through it. As he passed the gallery, Patricia Dobbs stood. So did Gloria Mendoza. Then Warren from investigations. Then Cheryl from intake. One by one, people rose without being told. Not to honor him, not to applaud, simply to stand. Maya understood that too. It was not for Whitmore. It was for themselves. For every year they had watched the building choose power over truth and learned to survive it quietly. For every insult swallowed, every shortcut noticed and not named, every decent man treated as disposable because he lacked a title. People over 45 had a way of standing in moments like that which younger people rarely understood. Not dramatic, not loud, just straight-backed, grief-seasoned, impossible to mistake. Whitmore noticed, and for the first time, his expression flickered beyond anger into something uglier. Not guilt, humiliation. Then he was gone through the side door under escort. The room released a breath, all at once. Noise rushed back in. Reporters burst into motion. The prosecutor tried to stand and thought better of it. Deputies murmured to one another near the rail. The clerk looked overwhelmed enough to faint. Someone outside the courtroom doors had clearly heard something, because the hallway beyond erupted in a low wave of questions and hurried footsteps. Maya turned to her father. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Robert looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, more tired. The ordeal had carved something into his face that would not disappear just because chains were gone. But his eyes were clear, fully clear for the first time since his arrest. "You all right?" she asked. And the second the words left her mouth, she almost laughed at herself. It was such a daughter question, such a human question, so inadequate for what he had endured. Robert gave a slow exhale. "I think I forgot what it felt like, not to have metal on me." Then he looked at her temple, at the fading bruise, at the shoulder she still held a little too stiffly. "They hurt you bad for this." Maya shook her head. "Not bad enough." That earned the faintest smile from him, and it nearly broke her heart. Charles Benton came around the table then, legal pad still in hand, like some part of him could not stop being a lawyer even now. "Reeves says the conviction will be stayed pending emergency review and likely vacated by the afternoon judge once the record transfers." He looked at Robert. "You're not walking out this minute." "But you are walking out." Robert lowered himself back into the chair as if his knees had finally decided to admit the week had happened. "Good," he said quietly. "Because I'm tired of county coffee." That got a real laugh out of Maya. Small, shaky, but real. It spread, oddly, because other people heard it and needed permission to feel something other than dread. Even Patricia smiled through tears. Gloria pressed a handkerchief to her eyes and muttered something about men making a mess of everything. Cheryl from intake hugged Warren in the aisle without seeming to realize she was doing it. The courtroom had become human again. It did not stay that way for long. Within 20 minutes, supervisors, administrative judges, and court security officials began pouring into the room, each with their own urgent face on, each trying to get in front of a scandal already outrunning them. Statements were discussed. Records were frozen. Offices sealed. Special review orders drafted. Maya watched all of it with a strange calm. This was how systems protected themselves after failing to protect anyone else. Through memos, directives, and carefully worded damage control. But underneath the bureaucratic scramble, one fact remained untouched. Her father had not killed Leon Dobbs, and Harold Whitmore had fallen in public. By mid-afternoon, Robert Williams was released pending full dismissal of all charges. No parade announced it. No music swelled. A clerk simply approached with papers that had to be signed, a release order that had to be stamped, and a plastic bag containing Robert's belt, watch, and wallet. After everything, freedom arrived the way many things in America did, with paperwork and fluorescent lighting. Maya stood beside him while he put his belt back on. His hands shook slightly at the buckle. "You okay?" she asked again. This time he nodded. Yeah, but she knew that nod. It meant not yet, but maybe later. When they finally stepped out onto the courthouse steps together, the day had turned bright and bitterly cold. Reporters surged forward instantly, cameras lifting, microphones extended. Questions flew over one another. "Mr. Williams, how do you feel being released?" "Maya, did you know it was Judge Whitmore? Do you believe others were involved? Was this racially motivated? Will you file suit against the county?" Robert stopped halfway down the steps, not because he wanted the attention, because he wanted to stand upright in daylight without anyone hurrying him for once. Maya stayed beside him, Charles Benton a step behind, Patricia Dobbs and Gloria farther up the stairs, watching like family who had survived the same storm from different houses. One reporter pushed closer than the rest. "Miss Williams, how did a 20-year-old intern bring down the most powerful judge in the city?" Maya looked past the microphones to the crowd gathered beyond them, courthouse workers on smoke break, older women who had lingered after errands, public defenders pretending not to watch from the doors, and ordinary Chicago people who knew exactly what it meant when someone poor and black had to bleed in public before truth counted. She answered, without raising her voice, because power survives when people get used to being afraid of it. The crowd went quiet. She looked back at the courthouse, at its stone columns and high windows and old American promise. Then she added, "And because robes don't make men righteous." No one shouted after that. Not right away. The cameras kept rolling, but the moment belonged to something quieter. Robert touched her elbow. "Come on, baby." They walked down the rest of the steps together. At the bottom, the wind cut hard across the plaza, and Robert pulled his coat tighter around himself. For a few seconds they just stood there, side by side, looking up at the building that had nearly swallowed them. "Your mama would have been proud," he said. Maya looked down at the broken cross, still wrapped in its napkin inside her pocket. Then, up at the winter sky over Chicago, pale and cold and endless. "I know," she said. That evening, the news stations would call it a stunning courthouse scandal. Legal analysts would debate ethics, procedure, public trust, and institutional reform. Committees would form. More names would emerge. Some people would pretend they had always suspected something. Others would claim shock as if shock itself were innocence. But none of that was the real ending. The real ending was smaller. A father carrying his own wallet again. A daughter no longer asking permission to speak. A dead janitor finally believed. An old building forced, however briefly, to tell the truth. As the winter light faded over downtown Chicago, Maya understood what justice really looked like for people like them. Not clean, not early, not kind, but sometimes, if you held on long enough, it arrived remembering every name. This story reminds the audience that power can wear a polished face and still hide deep corruption. It shows that truth is often carried not by the powerful, but by ordinary people who refuse to stay silent when injustice becomes unbearable. Maya's journey teaches that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to speak and act even when the system is built to silence you. Above all, the story tells us that dignity, loyalty, and moral truth can outlast humiliation, and that justice, though delayed and painful, still matters when someone is brave enough to fight for it. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.